Thank you. We are now live. Thank you very much. So, good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all to Cambridge City Council's Planning and Transport Scrutiny Committee. This includes members here in the chamber, those attending virtually, and those members of the public who are watching the live stream via the Council's YouTube channel. My name is Councillor Simon Smith, and I'm the chair of the committee this evening. Please can those present in the council chamber note that everything on your desk, including your laptop screen, could be broadcast at some point. If you are following the team meeting here in the chamber on your laptop, your audio, microphone and camera must be switched off. The camera follows the microphone being switched on, so those in the chamber are requested to wait a couple of seconds before speaking to allow the camera to catch up. If the fire alarm sounds, please follow officers who will leave the chamber and exit the building via the Pease Hill staircase and exit. Please do not use the lift. Please can those participating in the Teams meeting indicate that you wish to speak via the chat column. Please do not use the chat column for any other purpose. Please ensure you have switched off or silenced any other devices you have so that they do not interrupt proceedings. When you're invited to address the meeting, please make sure your microphone is switched on. When you finish addressing the meeting, please turn off your microphone immediately. Speak slowly and clearly, and please do not talk over or interrupt anyone. I will now roll call councillors alphabetically by surname so the public can see who they are. Please advise if you know any apologies from other councillors when I ask you to speak. So are you present? Councillor Bajent.
I most certainly am.
Councillor Bick.
Present.
Councillor Davies.
Good evening, Chair.
Councillor Herbert.
Good evening.
Councillor Pora. Councillor Smart.
Present, Chair.
Councillor Swift.
Present, Chair.
Present.
Yes, I am present now. Thank you, Chair. My microphone is working.
We are also joined by Executive Councillor for Planning, Policy and Infrastructure, Councillor Thornborough.
Present.
The officers permanently tabled for this meeting are Joint Director of Planning and Economic Development, Stephen Kelly.
Good evening.
Meeting Manager, Claire Tunnicliffe.
Good evening.
And Meeting Producer, Boris Herzog.
Good evening.
Councillor Pora is the break monitor for this meeting. Meeting procedure. For each agenda item, the committee will receive a presentation from the relevant report authors. Members will then discuss the report and vote on the recommendations. As chair, if the vote is split, I will have the casting vote. Following the vote of the committee, the Executive Council will be asked if they agree with the decision. Item 1. Apologies have been covered in the introduction. Have I missed anyone? No. Item 2. Please could committee members declare if they have any declarations of interest and identify which agenda item their declaration relates to. Councillor Bajent.
Chair, I'm a member of Cambridge Cycling Campaign.
Thank you, Councillor Bajent. We're now on to item 3, which is on page 3 of your agenda pack. These are the minutes of the meeting of the 4th of October 2022. They've been submitted to this meeting for approval. If there are any concerns, please could members raise them now, or otherwise they'll be approved as a correct record. So they've been approved as a correct record, then thank you. So we now move to agenda item 4. We have one registered speaker who has submitted two questions which have been circulated to all members of the committee in advance of this meeting, and a copy placed on the committee agenda papers on the City Council website. Mr. Carpen, welcome to the meeting. As you're aware, you have 3 minutes, followed by a further 2 minutes supplementary for each question. You'll be advised when the time has finished by the committee manager. Could you now begin, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, councillors. My name is Anthony Carpen. I am a local historian, amongst other things. My first question regards town planning, given the chronic shortage of town planners in Cambridge and South Cambridgeshire, and in particular with both of our local councils. My question is, what discussions have the two councils had with Anglia Ruskin University regarding the provision of town planning courses, part-time, full-time, and in the evening in Cambridge, mindful that they offer such courses at their campus in Chelmsford? Thank you.
So could the Executive Councillor please respond?
Thank you, Mr. Carpen, for bringing this question. Yes, across the UK, planning authorities are facing continued challenges in recruiting and retaining planning officers. Here at the Greater Cambridge Shared Planning Service, we're not immune to this challenge, but I'm pleased to say that in our frontline development management team, there are 41 planning officers dealing with planning applications. Successful recruitment means that currently there are 4 posts currently vacant, and 5 posts are filled by contract or temporary staff, primarily funded by planning performance agreements to address specific projects. Like most planning authorities, the shortage of experience and specialised planning and related professionals continues to present challenges as competition with the private sector for these people remain high. The Shared Planning Service is nevertheless participating in the South Cambs 3-month pilot for a 4-day week, with the explicit objective of helping to improve the recruitment and retention offer provided by the public sector. The Planning Service is one of the authorities who support the Royal Town Planning Institute in development and accreditation of the Planning Apprenticeship Programme, and alongside our continued support for postgraduate entry into the profession, with 2 of our team recently passing their postgraduate qualification in town planning, we expect to promote 6 new planning apprentices across the service in 2023. This is subject to a bid for their employment within the planning service, with the view of rotating the apprentices across the various functions in the planning service. This will create capacity for agency to be replaced by the more experienced team members. To this end, we have had a meeting with Anglia Ruskin University in September last year at a high level to outline the proposal. ARU have undertaken to assist with recruitment, which will commence after April this year, 2023, in readiness for a start of the new academic year in September 2023. The business team within ARU will provide advice, assistance, and practical help. The shared planning has previously raised about the difficult journey to reach ARU town planning course because it's based in Chelmsford. Clearly, moving an entire department from its base of some 30 years to Cambridge would be a major issue for them, and we don't expect that to happen. It's, however, acknowledged that with the increased uptake in work from home, potential apprentices may work being located further afield.
Mr. Carpen, do you have any supplementary questions in respect? Thank you.
I do, Mr. Chairman, thank you. In the last couple of months, Daisy Cooper MP, the Member of Parliament for St Albans for the Liberal Democrats, tabled a parliamentary question to the Secretary of State for Levelling Up Homes and Communities on the costs that local government bears in terms of large planning applications and how it costs them more in terms of town planning staff time than the developers actually pay in fees. And the Secretary of State has confirmed that he will meet with the Member of Parliament concerned to discuss how that issue can be resolved. Please can I ask the local councils to keep an eye on the outcome of those discussions and to see if it will bring about the needed flexibility to enable the local councils to charge the larger and more affluent developers the full costs that councils bear for large developments. Thank you.
Mr. Carpen, we are very interested in those discussions and other considerations about planning fees that the government are undertaking at the moment. So thank you for highlighting that particular one.
Any other supplementaries? Okay, thank you. Would you now like to ask your second question, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for indulging me in a second question. This one follows on from previous public questions I've tabled to the council. It's regarding a possible new large concert hall for Cambridge that was actually first proposed way back in the 1850s. But actually more recently, there have been strategies dating back to the 1960s that also mentioned it. For the emerging local plan, I identified a plot which I thought would be suitable, but it seems to have been struck out in the first iteration. The need for a new large concert hall was mentioned in the Cambridgeshire Horizons document 2006 and also in the Joint Indoor Leisure Strategy 2015 to 2031, and it's now 2033. Since the question I put in 2021, we've had the results of the census 2021 showing Cambridge's population is now over 145,000. Professor John Parry Lewis said in his study of Cambridge in 1973 that at 200,000 people, Cambridge needed a new urban centre. So my question is, what updates have we had for things like a new large concert hall venue and other city and region-wide civic and leisure infrastructure, given the future house building plans that we have? Because if we don't designate sites for these things, we will end up with what the Beehive Centre and Railpen have proposed with their site recently, where there is no practically usable green space in the most recent iteration of their plan for what is a very large redevelopment site. And it's something that I hope we can avoid and actually make the city more livable than it currently is. Thank you.
Could the Executive Council respond, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carpen. Well, we are committed to supporting the provision of cultural facilities to meet local needs, and we will be commissioning more evidence on this topic and developing an infrastructure delivery plan to accompany the draft local plan. With regard to concert venues, a comprehensive response was provided to a written question to the 26th of May 22, highlighting significant existing provisions. Regarding swimming pools, the councils are currently updating their indoor sports facilities strategy, which will take us to 2031, which includes indoor swimming provision to ensure we have the most up-to-date information about the needs in Greater Cambridge. The proposed submission in North East Cambridge AAP does not include a provision on site, but would seek contributions to support investment in swimming in the city. A visual/performing arts hub is identified as a requirement for the proposed submission AAP. You previously talked about the Milton Road garage site specifically. Based on engagement with the landowner, it is not likely that they will bring forward a swimming pool on the site during the planned period or beyond. Therefore, even if it was identified in our plan without an acquisition of the site, potentially through the councils using compulsory purchase orders, the AAP would be likely to be considered unsound if the independent inspector, if it was proposed for a new swimming pool in that location. you referred to the Beehive Centre, and that's developing as a current local plan. I know that the open spaces has been raised and is part of the ongoing discussions with the developers before the submission is made. But thank you for highlighting your concerns. Thanks.
Any supplementary questions to that main question? Thank you.
Thank you, and I apologise for missing out the second part of my question, which is, to state correctly, was on the North East Cambridge development site, which I went to the open day for and put those very questions to the members of staff there. My big concern on the swimming pools issue, in particular, is around the children. In that part of town, we've got some of our most economically deprived wards, with the inevitable poverty indices and indicators demonstrating the impact that has. And furthermore, the most recent documents we've had from the University of Cambridge is that they are not prioritising their swimming pool for their West Cambridge development. Given my own analysis of the documents and the lack of a public swimming pool in South Cambridgeshire, there does seem to me to feel like there is an under-provision of swimming pool places, and the longer this goes on, the worse it's going to become, in spite of the planning approval for the Perse School's swimming pool, which, as they've stated, is primarily a private one, not a public one. So I just wondered if the swimming pool for North East Cambridgeshire to serve King's Hedges and Arbury and East Chesterton in particular can keep going to try and persuade the landowners on that Milton Road garage site to change their mind, and if not, to appeal in particular to the wealthy private sector that we're told makes Cambridge's economy millions, to see if they can buy that site for us to build a swimming pool and an arts centre on it. Thank you.
Mr. Carpin, I think all of your concerns are valid from what some of the ward councillors have raised, and it will be very interesting to see how those points are covered in the strategy that's being developed now. If the strategy and the evidence confirms what you've said, then I hope we will look very seriously at provision and increase the provision in that area. But I think that currently we'll have to wait for that strategy. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your questions, Mr. Carpin. So we now turn to agenda item 5, page 9 of the agenda papers. Cambridge City Council and South Cambridgeshire District Council Authority Monitoring Report for Greater Cambridge 2021 to 2022. Mark Dees, the Senior Policy Officer Economic Development, will introduce this item and will be joined by Jenny Nutticum, Principal Planning Policy Officer. Both of whom join the meeting virtually. Mark, could you please begin?
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everyone. So I'm just going to run you through some of the key points from the AMR. As you probably know, the AMR is an annual publication which describes the progress against the local development scheme and monitors the impact of planning policies included in the development plan documents. These include both local plans for the area and 4 area action plans for North Stoke, Cambridge East, Cambridge Southern Fringe and North West Cambridge. This particular AMR covers the period April 21 to March 22, but it does provide more up-to-date information where appropriate. The AMR takes the form of a wide-ranging commentary supported by 2 data-driven appendices. Appendix 1 uses a red, amber, green system to monitor progress against all target-based indicators in the plans, whilst Appendix 2 provides detailed data behind the quantifiable indicators in a series of tables organised by topic. The basic conclusion is that we are making good progress in implementing the local development scheme, and our planning policies continue to have a positive impact on the sustainable development of Greater Cambridge and the quality of life of its residents. More specifically, in terms of the LDS, The local plan first proposals were subject to 6 weeks of public consultation in the winter 2021, and subsequently a report on the consultation responses was published in June 22, and the consultation responses are being shared with councillors and discussed in a series of meetings of the Joint Local Plan Advisory Group. The North East Cambridge AAP has also progressed during the monitoring year, and we've actually had 4 new neighbourhood plans adopted, formally made during the monitoring year, which were Cottenham, Histon and Imbington, Foxton and Waterbeach, and we've actually had two further ones made since the monitoring year completed in West Wickham and Gamlingay. In terms of the policies, perhaps the most significant statistic in the AMR relates to housing delivery. In the 21-22 monitoring year, there were 1,828 dwellings completed. This is above the average annual delivery rate required of 1,675 dwellings a year and was above for the 5th time in the last 6 years. Robust housing delivery is consistent with us maintaining a 5-year housing land supply and performing well against the housing delivery test, which are both critical to our policies being considered up to date. We're also delivering against our affordable housing targets. Permissions granted this year secured 40% affordable housing on eligible schemes, meeting the policy requirement for both local authorities. There was a small net loss in employment floor space in Cambridge, which was more than compensated for by an increase in South Cambridgeshire. Despite this, the largest single build was an office development on Station Road in Cambridge. And the net loss in Cambridge was largely attributable to the demolition of older employment space, which is due to be replaced with more modern accommodation in future years. Overall, there was a small net increase in retail space in both Cambridge and South Cambridgeshire, although the city did lose some smaller units to restaurant and cafe uses. The one red flag in our red, amber, green system relates to the lack of significant growth in retail space in Cambridge, contrary to the policies, which is a result of changing shopping trends and is unlikely to change in the future. Levels of all measured pollutants were below their respective national air quality objective levels during the monitoring year. Both councils have policies that seek to protect and enhance priority species and habitat, and these policies continue to be effective throughout the monitoring year and were strengthened by the adoption of the Biodiversity SPD in early 22. There have been no significant changes to the number of listed buildings or entries on the Historic England Buildings at Risk Register in either Cambridge or South Cambridgeshire, and quality of life indicators continue to be generally favourable for the Greater Cambridge area. I've already referred to the red flag for retail space in Cambridge. Appendix 1 also highlights a few amber flags. The majority of these were concerned with allocations such as West Cambridge, Clifton Road and Mitcham's Corner, where schemes are still being progressed. Otherwise, progress remains good, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. So we now move on to member questions. Could I ask you to raise your hand and then press your microphone when you are asked to speak? Thank you. I've just got Katie and Sam at the moment. Sapora.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the officers for the huge amount of work that must have gone into this report. I had a couple of questions. We've been approached, I think, many of the councils about lab space. Lots of developers are saying it's critical. I mean, in my own ward in Market, obviously there's quite a few issues around the Grafton area of that and at the Beehive. So I'd just be interested in officers' take on how that's going to change, because I'm also mindful that with Class E, where we've merged lots of different use classes, so for example, you used to have to get permission to change from a shop to residential or to lab. I'm just wondering how in future we are going to be able to track this kind of thing, because obviously it will require planning permission if someone needs to rebuild, but if they're just making a change within an internal structure, I worry that we're kind of going to lose this quite valuable data in future. So I'd just be grateful for a response on that. Thank you.
Did you want to ask a further question as well? Shall we just collect them all up? So, Councillor Davies, please.
Thank you. I think I have 6 questions, just as a heads up. So the first is a repeat of my question this time last year, about neighbourhood plans and why we have the discrepancy between, a growing discrepancy between the number of adopted and neighbourhood plans under development in South Cambs versus the city. The second is, could I have an update on the mention of community infrastructure levy at 2.25? It says it was paused in 2017 and there would be a review. Can you fill me in on that, please? The third is paragraph 3.18 about density. That is, the density quoted for the last year's building in the city is significantly ahead of the average. Is that something we should be expecting to see now in future years, or is that an anomaly? 3.71 on sports facilities. Can you give me some clarity about the timing of that review? 3.77 about community space. I raised this at the briefing last week, and I think officers undertook to come back to me with some clarification. My query was that of the additional space quoted, the majority of that was in a facility which is not accessible to the public, and how much of the rest of it was in facilities that were available to the public. And the last one is 3.110 on, I guess, what you'd call quality of life measures. So there's a statement which talks about how that's assessed in terms of good quality housing, well-designed street scenes, well-laid-out neighbourhoods, etc., etc. Is there any ambition, or would it be appropriate for the planning service, and this report in particular, to incorporate in future years any wider measures of life satisfaction or well-being? Thank you.
If you ask your question, please.
Thank you. Yes, thank you very much for an extremely comprehensive report, which is much appreciated. And my questions are two, and they're very simple. I wanted to ask if you could elaborate on the comment on Mitcham's Corner. I'm being parochial here because Mitcham's Corner is within West Chesterton that I represent, and it would be helpful, I think, to me and to my colleague, Councillor Swift, who also represents West Chesterton, because we're seeking to move on earlier plans that have been put forward in relation to Mitcham's Corner. So it would just be appreciated if you could just elaborate on your comment in relation to Mitcham's Corner. And then the second question, again, is very simple, but when you talk about retail spaces and that there's been a small net increase in retail space, I'm just wondering if that means that it's retail space that is actually occupied by a retailer that's currently operative, or is it simply that there are retail spaces there available for retailers? Because everybody, I think, in Cambridge City must be concerned about the problem of empty retail spaces and the urgent need to have retailers in those spaces who are actually operating on a retail basis. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mark, are you going to respond to Councillor Pora's question, please? This is on labs.
Yeah, I'll make start. I think with the regard to the monitoring, clearly the sort of big lab space stuff that we're seeing coming forward will come forward through planning permission, so we should be able to monitor that. With regard to changes of uses, yes, it is increasingly going to be an issue where people can change within the e-use class without requiring planning permission. You raised this at one of the briefings, so I did actually take an opportunity to discuss with colleagues and other local authorities at a meeting I had last week. There weren't any simple answers to this. One suggestion was we could explore some of the commercial data sets that are available to see if there's any monitoring information there, but that would likely be expensive. Second option would be to go out and actually survey. At the moment, we just survey planning permissions every year in order to monitor stuff which doesn't require planning permission. You literally have to go and look at every site, which I think would be not practical. The one thing that we do, which may give us a slight insight, as part of the Cambridge local plan policies, we do monitor retail use in 6 district centres, sub-centres, and I think the policy is around 55% of the units in those sub-centres should be remain in retail use. So we actually do a survey periodically where we go out and look at those units, regardless of whether they've been a planning permission or not. So that would only give us a small insight. Probably wouldn't pick up the R&D because it's not the sort of thing I think you're going to see in the sub-centres, but it would be one partial solution. But other than that, no, I think it is generally just going to be difficult to monitor things that don't require planning permission.
So I'm going to ask Jonathan Dixon to, because there's some research recently you've had from the latest review that deals some very detailed market information on wet labs. So could you explain to the committee the situation and how that's going to inform the future, the emerging local plan, please?
Thank you, Chair. So Mark's quite correct. The difficulty is this is a monitoring report on land use. The primary data we get on many of these issues comes from monitoring the planning applications which you or the committees deal with. But we do supplement that with additional information from a range of sources, and the one in particular referencing is one of the supporting documents on the next report this committee is considering. So we employ consultants to give us information on the changing economy and how they make recommendations then regarding how we might address that or consider it through the local plan process. And in doing so, you'll see in the report that we've published, they draw on quite a wide range of sources, not just the planning data, but modelling and various sources that property agents use in terms of monitoring changes in take-up and looking at those specific land uses. So I think the answer is we must continue to supplement the data we get through the planning process with more bespoke reports that can draw on those more nuanced information sources.
So, Councillor Pura, I think wet labs are a very specialist property product that generally in modern buildings, and there is an identified need for them, and my understanding is there's very little space available on the market. That's a strong signal that there's additional suppliers required, and we know that the life sciences sector is growing very, very rapidly. So this is something for the local plan and the employment land allocations.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I don't have a problem with the lab use. I just want to make sure we're tracking it in the annual monitoring, because I think, as the Chair says, it's interesting if that is coming up, that we need to make sure we've got provision for it. Could I just briefly mention declaration of interest? I do work for Anglia Ruskin, but I had no knowledge prior to that question or the Executive Councillor's response. So I've had no involvement. I just thought I should mention that as it came up earlier. Thank you.
So we're now on to Councillor
Can
Davies.
Sorry. I was wondering, with regard to the monitoring that Councillor Porra is talking about, won't that come up through council tax and business tax? Because if something changes from a retail area to a domestic area, then the taxation changes. Won't we be able to monitor through that?
Chair, there is a piece of work that the council was looking at to try and understand effectively the cross-cutting of databases to try and allow us to improve some of our monitoring. Off the top of my head, I can't remember where that has got to, but triangulating council tax or looking for proxies that might give a useful insight in terms of some of our data is something that project was seeking to try and do, recognising that our planning information systems don't necessarily, because of GDPR and so on, they're quite tightly constrained. The business, you look at the business rates register. It's something we can pick up with the team to determine whether or not those types of reports on net change in terms of premises are something that their system can generate, but it would certainly obviously help provide context. I suppose one of the points I wanted to kind of stress is that the reason this report is quite narrow in some areas, quite comprehensive, is that these are the indicators that in the adopted plan we said we would monitor against. There are clearly, as the chair's highlighted, a whole series of contextually significant material planning considerations that go beyond that, particularly around economic performance, that the planning committees have to have regard to right now. But well, certainly we can pick up on and explore with the council tax and business rates team whether they can report next year for some context.
Thank you. Can we just turn to Councillor Davies' first question, which was the anomaly between the large number of neighbourhood plans being brought through in South Cambs, and I think there's just only one in the city at the moment. Who's going to answer that? Thank you, Jonathan.
I could. So you're going to go, John?
It's a difficult one to answer again. I don't have probably a particularly different answer to last year, other than South Newham clearly South Newham are progressing their plan. We do try to make information available on neighbour planning. We've provided toolkits, and we are more than willing to come out and talk to any neighboured area that would wish to consider a plan. It's just there hasn't been the interest in take-up in Cambridge that we've had in the parishes of South Cambs, but we would continue to support anyone that came forward and wanted to do a plan, because they have been really positive in planning for the areas that have taken them up.
Okay, so the next question was an update on the SIL, reference at section 2.25. This matter was paused in 2017. Is there been any further consideration of the SIL, please?
Short answer to this, the decision was made to focus using the Section 106 approach and continue with that. Clearly, it's another issue. We are very much looking in the local plan through infrastructure and viability, and we'll have all those studies updated. But the complicating factor is clearly the government talking about bringing in a levy and changing the rules again. So it's difficult to be definitive at this point what to do, rather than waiting to see what the outcome of that process is. But we are live to the issue of making sure we choose the best route for securing the funding needed for the long list of things we'll be trying to address in the local plan.
Can we just move on to the question about density? This is above the average. I suspect this was due to some large completions in the city.
Yes, the way we measure densities, we only measure sites once they've been completed. So it can be quite lumpy in a sense, the data, because it'll just depend on which particular sites are being completed. So I wouldn't expect a sort of nice, easy trend there. So I think the data is in the appendices, so you can see how it varies year on year, but it does jump around a bit.
I guess Timberworks might have been one of those high density sites.
Without looking at the numbers, I couldn't say, but yes, you may well be right there.
I think, Councillor Davies, that's where the explanation sits. There's reference here to sports facilities. Okay.
So there's several studies being looked at for the local plan. To support the 2018 local plans, the council's commissioned a playing pitch strategy and an indoor facility strategy. We've already commissioned updates to those two strategies, including addressing the swimming pools, which we talked about earlier. The output of those will be to test the proposals that end up in the Greater Cambridge Local Plan, which we're going to come on to, but those studies are ready to go. to test the strategy we end up with and make sure we are informed by the best information possible. Similarly, on our open space standards, through the Great Places and the green infrastructure themes in the local plan, we said we would be updating our evidence regarding green infrastructure needs and the best way to deliver standards which were effective in delivering different types of spaces appropriate to different areas. That study is also being commissioned, and we will aim to have that ready to inform the draft plan later this year.
And the next question, can you refresh my memory, please, Councillor Davis?
Community space?
Yeah, so the specific issue which I raised at the briefing was that it talks about a net increase of just over 3,000 square metres of D1 floor space, but 1,700 square metres of that D1 is accounted for by the Magdalen College Library, which of course is not publicly accessible. So I asked officers if they would take a look at what the remaining 1,400 square metres was, and whether that was genuinely publicly accessible or whether that was also college or university building.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I'm happy to share the data if that helps, so you can see the detail, but I did have a quick look myself. Of the four largest increases, one was the one you've already referred to. Another one was actually a day nursery at Homerton College, which I guess is the same issue. And then the other two were new community space at the Mill Road Depot housing scheme, and also an extension to a Salvation Army chapel. But I can, might be easy if I just send you the spreadsheet where you can actually see the data behind that and look at all the permissions.
Thank you.
They were the biggest.
Thank you. So the next one was relating to the quality of life measures, and could there be metrics incorporated concerning elements of well-being?
At the moment, as Stephen mentioned earlier, we monitor the indicators that are in the plans. And at the time the plans were written, a lot of the quality of life measurement was based around something called the, I think at one point it was called the Place Survey, and later it was called the Quality of Life Survey, which is a government survey. Unfortunately, they deceased that survey some years ago and didn't replace it with anything. So we have a bit of a vacuum there. So there isn't any, we can't measure those specific indicators because the survey doesn't exist, but always interested in the contextual information that we can include in the data appendices around quality of life if there are things that you think we should be looking at.
Jonathan, did you want to add to that?
My recollection is that, yes, previously we've tried to use quality of life indicators, and their collection has been quite variable in terms of coming up with indicators when you start a plan making process and finding by the time you're several years in, the data is no longer collected. We come out with the draft local plan. One of the tasks it will have to address is what's the new set of indicators, and we have to balance coming up with a set of indicators which give us a good feel for the economic, environmental, social impacts, whilst not creating work that isn't going to add value. It's that balance. But certainly that set of indicators is something we'll be coming to, well, members of this group later in the year with. This is the proposals to what we monitor through the new plan. There'll be a chance to look at whether you think we've got it right or not.
Mr. Kelly, please.
Well, it's just building on Jonathan's comments. Obviously, the council's currently doing some work around place, but there's a kind of wider data gathering which goes to kind of quality of life indicators and also some of those more challenging indicators that might form a focus as we go forwards. And Jane Wilson, I think, is leading on that work. I expect her I believe she'll be reporting the kind of findings of that work to a kind of future committee, not necessarily planning and transport, but of the council. And I would suggest, picking up on Jonathan's point, the local plan indicators are not necessarily the most, they're great for monitoring local plans performance, but we may well, if we accept that, in fact, the definitions of quality of place and so on are shifting, there may well be different avenues or more immediate avenues that are more relevant to circumstances at that time. As Jonathan said, we go through in the examination process, we have to suggest the indicators that we're going to use to monitor the plan. And then, so that was 2017 or so, we were going through that exercise. The governments changed the indicators, the dynamics, so there may be other avenues that might give us a better insight. And there are some lessons for us in the monitoring process, given the huge amount of resource that we spend on this monitoring process for the next plan, about really drilling down into the things that matter most, because, you know, a significant amount of resource is currently devoted to it.
Can we now go to the vote, the recommendation on page 10?
Councillor Scott had some.
Oh, I beg your pardon. Sorry,
questions, I
sorry,
think.
sorry, Councillor Scott. You had a question on Mitcham's Corner. How could I cut that corner? Yeah, thank you.
I'd be happy to pick this one up. So I believe the reference is to the fact that the Mitcham's Corner supplementary planning document was adopted several years ago. Through the local plan, the first proposals clearly proposed ideas around what we would do with these areas of change policies, and we said we would carry forward many of those and update them into the new local plan. So, like some of my previous answers, this is something we all look to pick up through the draft plan and consider how we best provide guidance for those areas moving forward. So it's very much not forgotten. It's something we need to get to as we go through our plan.
Scott.
Thank you very much. We appreciate that. What we've done in West Chesterton is set up a local liaison forum which comprises the local councillors, the Friends of Mitcham's Corner, and residents' associations and various others. So I would like to ask at this point if you or one of you officers would be prepared to come and address the local liaison forum so that you can gain knowledge from what's happening from the West Chesterton end of things, and the people in West Chesterton can gain the knowledge in terms of what's happening from your end. That would be much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Scott's second question was relating to retail floor space vacancies.
Yeah, I can pick that up. I think she's absolutely right that actually what we're monitoring is floor space through planning permissions, and therefore it doesn't take account of whether that space is actually vacant or occupied. As I mentioned earlier, we do have some specific monitoring that we do of district sub-centres where we do actually go and monitor all the units and record what use they are, including whether they are vacant. But in general terms, the figures we are publishing in terms of square metres of floor space for retail is the permission, regardless of whether it's actually occupied or not.
I mean, I was going to move to the vote on the recommendations on page 10 of the agenda pack. I will read them out. So the Executive Council has recommended to A, agree the Cambridge City Council and South Cambridgeshire District Council Authority Monitoring Report for Greater Cambridge 2021 to 2022, included as Appendix A for publication on the Council's websites. E, delegate any further minor editing changes to the Cambridge City Council and South Cambridgeshire District Council Authority Monitoring Report for Greater Cambridge 2021 to 22 to the Joint Director of Planning and Economic Development in consultation with the Executive Council for Planning, Policy and Transport. Can all those in favour please raise their hand? So that's unanimous. Does the Executive Council agree with the recommendation?
Yes, I'll accept that. And I'd just like to reiterate thanks to the officers for producing this huge amount of information. It's actually quite interesting, and I hope public, if they're listening, might delve into it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so I can only endorse that comment. That's a monumental piece of work. It's very, 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 very good piece of work, and we very much appreciate it. Thank you to you. We now turn to agenda item 6 on page 301 of your agenda pack. It's This is Greater Cambridge Joint Local Plan. John Dixon, Planning Policy Manager, and Caroline Hunt, Strategy and Economy Manager, will present this item. So over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll do quite a brief run through of the reports. We are actually doing a public webinar tomorrow on our website, and it'll be published after the webinar takes place tomorrow as well, where we'll go through in a bit more detail just to give full information on the report as part of the ongoing effort to put information on our website. I'm just going to start with a quick reminder of where we've got to, or how we got here really. You'll recall we started work on the first joint local plan for the area back in 2019, and where we started talking to stakeholders about the important things we should do with our plan. And in 2020, we held our first conversation. We got a huge amount of feedback. We had events like the big conversation in the Corn Exchange, which really gave us a good guide about what stakeholders, the public thought direction of the plan should be. And then building on that, we consulted again on the first proposals, which set out what we consider to be, the sites that should be used or could be used to meet them, and the policies around our big themes that could be used to shape those. And again, we got literally thousands of comments back and new suggestions that we reported to members in the summer last year. Now, as part of that consultation, we said we would come back to members in January now with up-to-date information on the needs, particularly taking account of the impacts of COVID and looking at some of the key issues relating to our development strategy. Reminder that this isn't the whole plan. We're really focused on some strategic issues today, but we will be drawing together policies on those big themes: climate change, biodiversity, well-being, and great places as we come back to you for future sessions. This isn't a consultation stage. This is about bringing to you the latest information we've got in terms of some of those key issues and getting a steer from members that will then help us to go away and draft the plan as a whole. So this report in particular provides the latest information we've got looking at the updated needs for jobs and homes. It explores the issues that then that arise in terms of provision of employment and housing. It looks to confirm the development principles we should be using as we address those. And finally, it looks to confirm some of those key building blocks around the plan that we feel able to recommend to you at this point to guide our preparation of the document. And I'll hand over at that point.
Thank you. So I'm going to run through those issues one by one, starting with the overall context really for any plan making process, which is national planning policy in the National Planning Policy Framework, and thinking about our need for jobs and homes in the first instance. The national framework requires all councils to have a clear understanding of their objectively assessed need for housing and other uses actually in the area, and to address those needs unless the adverse impact of doing so would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits. So we have a very clear starting point in national policy. The first proposals were supported by evidence from independent specialist consultants of our forecast need for jobs in the area and the homes necessary to support them, and that provided our starting point for those first proposals. And those first proposals included a target to meet those needs in full and the sites that would be proposed to meet those needs. But it was very clear that meeting those needs was contingent on there being no unacceptable harm to the environment, particularly in respect of water, and I'll come back to that in a moment. So sticking with the need for jobs and homes first, I think it's perhaps useful just to remind members the approach we took in looking at and calculating those needs. We started with the government standard method for calculating the minimum number of homes and understanding the jobs that those would support. And in the context that those jobs were significantly less than the forecast jobs coming to the area, we also then looked at our consultants and understanding the additional homes required to support those forecast jobs. So in terms of the numbers, the standard method has been updated. It's within a few hundred of the method that's identified in the first proposals, and we updated the number of jobs that would support. And you can see there that the standard method number of jobs is significantly less than that forecast in 2021. But our update has identified an increase on the forecast number of jobs. So despite the impact of COVID-19, which has reduced jobs in some sectors, particularly population-focused sectors, our high-tech and biotech sectors have seen continued strong growth even through coming out the other side of the pandemic, to the extent that our forecast jobs is now some 8,000 odd more than forecast at the time of the first proposals. And we've then also updated the homes that would be needed to support those jobs, and they go up by some 7,000 odd homes beyond the number identified in the first proposals. So just giving a sense of what that means, we have a significant amount of housing supply already in our adopted plans, over 37,000 homes. The first proposals identified another 11,500 homes, including a 10% buffer. So we would now be looking at around another 8,000 homes to meet those new identified needs in full. So where does that leave us? The starting point for the local plan is meeting our needs in full, but it is, as I said at the outset, it's about identifying whether it is possible and appropriate to deliver those needs in full. So the needs are our starting point, but the next step is for the councils to understand whether we can put together a sustainable and deliverable plan that would meet those needs in full. Water supply is a key issue, as is housing delivery, because a theoretical plan, it's actually got to be a plan that is capable of being delivered. We wanted to explore those issues in much more detail before we get to a point where we can identify what the target for the plan should be. Your needs are one thing, you then have to identify what the appropriate target is for the plan. So no decision is being made at this point. The recommendations before you are to recognise the forecast needs, but no decision is in the recommendations before members to confirm any particular target at this point in time. So looking first at water, we know water is a really key issue. We know it's a key issue to members. We know it's a key issue to our communities. And that's been confirmed through the consultation. The chalk streams, particularly important, sensitive ecological biodiversity asset to the area, being impacted by abstraction from the aquifer, and therefore in our first proposals they were contingent on understanding and there being water supply available that didn't cause unacceptable environmental harm. We know now, because Water Resources East has published the first regional plan for water resources of its kind, and that sets out on a wider basis than just individual water companies what the plans are for meeting need for water over the region in the period to 2041 and well beyond. We know that they are proposing to have a bulk water transfer from the north to come in for 2030, if not before. And in the longer term, there's the Fens Reservoir proposed to be operating from around 2035 to 37. So we know there's the water supply will improve. The question is at what point and what capacity there is for meeting needs in the interim as we move towards the provision of the reservoir. Cambridge Water's Water Resource Management Plan is expected out in draft very soon. We'd anticipated it being out in the autumn, but it's been delayed. And until we have that, actually understanding the capacity and water supply that will be available to meet our needs in the new plan is something we simply don't know at this point. But will be a really key issue for us as we move forward to the draft plan. But as I said, it's not just about having a technical plan, it's about having a plan that's actually capable of delivering on the ground. And therefore, particularly given the water supply situation, which is likely to mean that we're going to have a phased housing target, it's likely to go up as we go through the plan period and different water supply, more water supply comes on available. And it simply is challenging to see at this point in time how a shortfall in the early and even middle part of the plan period could be made up in full in those last 5-6 years of the plan, because there'd be a limit to how much can realistically be delivered in any individual year in those last 5 or 6 years. So we commissioned some further work from our housing delivery consultants. What they've said is there's no magic single number that they can give us at this point to help us understand what that ceiling might be. They do think it would be challenging to deliver our needs in full, our new objectively assessed needs in full. They think in part that might be influenced by the strategy we use, and we might be able to get a bit more delivery if we went for more dispersed development. Clearly that's something that we need to think about very carefully, though, because that doesn't seem to fit terribly well with our guiding principles, our development principles, and I'll come on to those in a moment. So that's something they say might deliver a bit more, but we need to think, would that be a sustainable form of development? And they also say some interventions might be needed in the market, try and see if it's possible to deliver more than the market would simply do on its own. So at this point, we simply don't know the answer in terms of quite how much we can deliver, and therefore it's not appropriate for us to identify a specific target for the plan at this point. And we simply don't know whether we'll be able to meet our needs in full. So I mentioned our development strategy principles. We identified those in the first proposals, and they guided the sites that were included in the first proposals. And they're set out in the development strategy update at Appendix A of the report. And it looked about principles that guided development to locations where it had the least climate impact, where active public transport's a natural choice, where green infrastructure can be provided alongside new development, where jobs and services are located close to where people lived and having all the necessary facilities. So those principles are still good principles, we feel, and we're recommending that those are confirmed through this report to help us as we move forward and we understand what might be delivered, understanding water and delivery, and then the strategy that we put together, we're suggesting should still be informed by those principles. We would start with the first proposal sites, but we may need to look at sites beyond that, and we're saying those principles are the ones that we should look at. I say we start with the first proposal sites. We think at this point it is reasonable and appropriate for us to recommend to you confirming 3 key strategic sites to form part of the development strategy. And that's because we know that once the reservoir's in place, we will be able to deliver more than just beyond the 2018 local plans. North East Cambridge came out as our most sustainable location for development, recognising it's within the urban area of Cambridge, really well served by public transport, by active transport, and accessibility to services and facilities. So our most sustainable location, Cambridge East, safeguarded land outside the urban area at the moment, but safeguarded land for development on the edge of Cambridge, our second most sustainable location. And both of those, we think it's helpful at this point to also give clarity to promoters of key infrastructure to release those sites for development, to confirm that they're part of the strategy for our new plan moving forwards. Remembering North East Cambridge is dependent on the relocation of water treatment works, and the development consent order we understand due to be submitted soon, and the relocation of Cambridge Airport, the marshals have now submitted a planning application for the relocation of the airport to Cransfield. So it's really important that those processes continue to enable us, those key two sites to come forwards. And then Cambridge Biomedical Campus is also a really important site in terms of the life sciences that we were talking about earlier, both to Cambridge but to the country and actually internationally. So we think it's important to confirm that site to give confidence to the landowners there to continue to develop their improved master plans for improving the at the moment. We've not made a decision at this stage to recommend to you on the Greenbelt release to the south, but we are of a view that it continues to be something that we should explore as we develop the draft plan, and we'll come back to you with a recommendation in that plan. So in summary, to wrap up, what the development strategy update is asking members to agree is to recognise our updated evidence for jobs and homes, not to agree a target at this stage, but to recognise the need, to confirm the principles that should guide any further sites to be included in the plan, and to confirm those 3 key sites as part of any strategy. And what we will then do as we develop the draft plan to bring back to you in the autumn is to confirm that strategy, confirm what that housing target should be, confirm the sites that should make up and meet those needs, come back to you with full policies, a full draft local plan, so with policies and requirements for those sites, and fully worked up policies for all those key themes around climate change and biodiversity, etc. And just then, a reminder that this meeting is obviously making the City Council's a decision on the report. It was considered by South Cam Scrutiny on Thursday last week, and it will then be considered at their Cabinet meeting on the 6th of confirm the way forward for us as we continue to develop the draft local plan. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentations, John and Caroline. So we now move to member questions. I suggest what we do is, with your consent, that we deal with these questions in the 3 elements that Caroline set out. So the first one would be around jobs and homes. We'll do that bundle. Then we'll go on to the development principles, and we'll then talk about the last thing about the 3 strategic sites. And we can pick up on the water issues on the next agenda item. I think that's we just focus on that then. So. Do I have your consent? Councillor Bick, I have noted you've got your hand up. Thank you. Sorry. Okay, so we're going to talk about jobs and homes first of all. So Councillor Bick, and then Councillor Scott, and then Councillor Davies.
Chair, you said questions, but I think it's also appropriate to exchange comments on this, because we are here to talk to each other as well as just to ask. Try and recognise what you just said about your subdivisions. I'm very familiar with this approach, but I can't entirely say that it will purely be that. But first wanted to say that I support the proposed strategy and the recommendations. I mean, I understand and agree the key dependencies that the officers have highlighted in this report, namely water and deliverability. And I recognise that they're both intensified as dependencies by the recent data, the updates of the need information that we've got for jobs and homes. I'd like to make it perfectly clear that for me, the deal breakers on the kind of local plan we've been preparing remain an acceptable solution to the water supply issue and a focus on only sustainable locations for development. But I wanted also to add, because I think it's important because of the debate that goes on everywhere and should be reflected here. Importantly, I don't start from the position of regarding the increased need for homes and jobs as in themselves sort of something that's toxic or something to find every reason under the sun to undervalue or to fight off. The new data that we've been given accords with my observation and all the data that I've seen from other sources that our local economy continues to be outstandingly successful. It seems we should be proud of our local workforce and proud of their achievements, and so should they. I can't understand why we would not want that here, or why we would want to stamp on one of the best performing parts of the national economy, moreover one which is overwhelmingly focused on innovation for good, as well as providing vitality for local ancillary and service sectors. It's perfectly reasonable in principle to welcome that in Greater Cambridge and also to welcome that happening in other places all around the country. It's not and never has been a zero-sum game. And it's a chink of light, I think, in the national industrial strategy that the government actually seems to be starting to understand the role of universities elsewhere in generating prosperity across the country. And that is a possible learning from places like this. We're not sure that the consequences of stamping out the success of our local economy here would be that it happened anywhere else, and history rather suggests it wouldn't. But it would further accelerate the pricing out of key workers from Cambridge, making it an ever more socially exclusive place, with more long-distance commuting, more difficulty for employers to attract, retain, and recruit staff of all kinds, impacting not only businesses but public services alike, and the capability of enterprises to build on their own success. And I'm acutely aware that accommodating new homes and jobs doesn't come without its own problems. For some existing residents, as familiar places change around them, the potential for deficits in infrastructure and services to open up, the pressure on natural resources we're talking about, landscape and historic character. So in following the strategy recommended, these become the issues on our agenda to resolve. It doesn't have to be all doom. It's what planning is for. I think it's what we're all here for on a committee like this. These are challenges to be resolved, not reasons for desperation. I would rather we actually had these kind of problems to address than those that would come from the reverse situation where we tried to freeze out growth or didn't even have a spark of growth in our local economy at all. The reality is that under all scenarios that could emerge from what is recommended in this report, growth will be hugely constrained in Greater Cambridge. You only have to consider the hugely long list of bids for sites for development, whose rejection from the new local plan remains likely for the vast majority, even at this stage. I don't think that sort of thing happened when Manchester originally grew around coal mines and cotton, and we should be pleased about that, and development can now and should be controlled. But by working with, rather than diametrically against growth, we have the capacity as local authorities to fashion and shape and pace the development of our area for the good. You've only got to look at Trumpington to see how an urban extension can become a range of diverse new communities, underpinning and sharing with everyone else new schools and open spaces, as well, I know, as teething problems and lessons for the future. I support the recommendation to take forward the 3 new sites at the edge of the city on a provisional basis, recognising that in the case of the extension to the biomedical campus, I think this does need to be underlined if I read this correctly, that means still evaluating the case for it, not having decided it at this stage. But it's obvious for the other 2 at North East and East Cambridge that there are complex considerations for current activities that are still going on there, as well as long overdue planning at both locations, which benefit from a little more commitment on our side. So it seems a very sensible thing to work some more on those things. But having said that, Chair, I've got 3 questions that I would like to get to. There are some questions here. The first of those is, while supporting how we propose to handle the issue of water supply, how can we make sure that we still advance the allied challenge of water demand in terms of the design standard for new homes? I think we've been envisaging a pioneering policy to have homes designed for 80 litres per person per day, significantly below current national building regulations. But whatever is achieved with improved water supply, that demand standard would make it much more sustainable, and we shouldn't want to let go of it. Water is going to remain a valuable natural resource, and we should be reducing its use under all circumstances if we sensibly can. And so my question is, how will this draft policy on the 80 litres be factored into the evaluation of the water issue at the stage we've got the information we need from the water companies? The second question is, if we don't get sufficient satisfaction from the water industry about water supply, is it really a satisfactory response, as it seems to be hinted in the papers, is it really a satisfactory response to try to get neighbouring councils to agree to provide for our housing needs? They are likely to be dependent on the same water sources as we are, and that would seem to me a bit of a Pyrrhic victory, which may keep our consciences clean, but not actually advance the cause that we're concerned about. So what are we doing to establish an alliance of all neighbouring councils to adopt a similar position to our own on the question of water being a constraint for development? And the third question about deliverability. If the timing of the solution to the water issue enlarges the development needed in the years at the end of the new plan period, how can we avoid departing from the fundamentally good development strategy, especially in the rural area, focused essentially on sustainable locations? And has any thought been given at this stage to extending the time period for the new local plan, say until 2046, to enable us to remain faithful to the sites and the strategy we've said that we prefer, but which might otherwise run out of time to become deliverable in the local plan? Has any thought been given to that? Sorry, Chair, about the length of time, but it means I don't have to keep coming back, and I'd be grateful to hear some responses to those.
Well, thank you for your presentation and your thoughts and your views and the questions, of course. So can you just decide between you who's going to handle these questions, please? So Jonathan's going to answer the first one.
So, as was stated in the first proposals, we proposed that the draft plan should include strong water standards for residential, looking at the 80 litres, and also non-residential, how we can deal with standards of that. Since that time, we are exploring the issues raised in representations, because we need to explore the comments received both for and against and be able to respond to those. And as part of working on water, we are engaged with our consultants who are continuing to develop our integrated water management study. So that will include more evidence about how this standard can be implemented, and we continue to seek support and advice on those standards from the water company and from Environment Agency. Informally, when we've discussed it with them, they are very supportive of us, including strong standards. How will it be factored in? Well, clearly, at the moment, when we develop our standards, the standard at the time is then conditioned into the permissions that are granted. So we will need to be aware of the impact that can have when we have our new standard compared with those sites which are already consented. The other side of it, though, is that Cambridge Water Company, in developing their plan, are also very aware of the need to seek to reduce typical water usage across the area, and hopefully the methods they'll be bringing forward, such as rolling out smart metering, so people are very aware of actually what they're using and if they've got a leaking toilet and that sort of thing. I understand from discussions with them, measures they looking at the demand side can be very effective. So I suspect our policies will be used alongside those policies which will look at the existing stock as well. So hopefully together there can be a significant impact on demand as well as supply. Looking at the second question, it's not quite as simple to say that all the surrounding areas have the same water issues we have, because I think, as we've talked about previously, Cambridge is fairly unique in the places where it has got its water in the past, drawing from the chalk aquifers south of Cambridge primarily. So whilst I agree clearly it's an issue that will come up in our duty to cooperate discussions, it may be those issues aren't quite the same, but I completely agree it's another issue that the surrounding authorities will have to be aware of.
And just saying slightly more on that second question, we've already approached our neighbours under the duty to cooperate through preparing the first proposals, not specifically about water actually, but just in principle when you're preparing a plan where you're giving any consideration to potential Greenbelt review, even as a possible strategy option, which we were as we developed the first proposals, you have to talk to your neighbouring authorities. So we have had one conversation with them. It's fair to say none of our neighbours at that point were feeling able to offer any real hope that they would be able or willing to take any of our need. Clearly, we will need to go through that process again, though, if we do conclude that we can't meet our needs in full, because national planning policy requires that that's what we do. It is something we have to do as a matter of process. In terms of the timing, I think that's really interesting question. I think the first thought I have in terms of extending the plan period is the needs will go up further, because obviously every year will generate need. I guess what it gives is potential to spread that need slightly more, but I think the amount that we could realistically deliver in those last few years of the plan period would still be something that we can cover for this plan, and then when we review the plan again as we're getting nearer, we would have that slightly longer period to look at. I mean, it's something we can give some thought to. My first thought is I'm not sure it gains us anything particularly, but it's something we can explore to see if we think that it would give more flexibility. But absolutely, in terms of ensuring that we don't end up with a strategy that involves development that we don't consider fits with our principles. That's one of the reasons bring those principles back to you today, to seek that confirmation that those feel the right principles. You consider them to be the principles that we should apply. And And then we have to work out, clearly there are nuances, there are decisions to be made as we take that forwards. It's not completely black and white as to exactly how much development would you put in any of those particular types of location. It's a judgment based on a whole range of factors, as was in the case when we put together the first proposals. And that's something we would bring back to you with a proposal for your consideration in due course.
I just wanted to make a comment about the consensus that you bring to this, Councillor Beck, because the local plan making takes a long time, and it's really important that there is that consensus within the council to ensure the continuity of this. Where there has been opposition from one party to the administration during the plan making process, and there's been a change in administration, not that I'm predicting that at all here, but in that event, and that new incoming administration wants to turn over that plan and start all over again, you end up with a situation where we're not covered by up-to-date planning policies, and it results in basically a free-for-all in development. So I just wanted to note the appreciation that we have a consensus, and how important it is for the benefit of the whole of the city and the Greater Cambridge area. Thank you. Councillor Davis.
Thank you. And I wouldn't wish to puncture the picture of cosy consensus which you just described, but I do have some observations. I think I too am going to potentially struggle to adhere to your tripartite format for discussing this. Apologies for that. So yes, I mean, regardless of the views of people in this chamber, I think there is a very live debate in the city more widely about the growth agenda and what an appropriate quantum is. And I think one of the elements of that is whether the demand for employment space here is, to all intents and purposes, infinite at this point, and therefore whether it's ever possible to go anywhere towards sating it. And I'd be interested to know kind of officers' perspective on that demand. How we have a low, medium and high growth strategy, but or range of numbers, but do you think the high growth numbers really convey the full appetite to come to do business in Cambridge? Because I would be curious to know where our middle case actually lies on the full spectrum. And secondly, I'm interested in the balance within the economy. So in Appendix B, paragraph 1.7 talks about a fall in employment in population-related sectors such as construction, retail, food, arts and recreation. And it's notable that investment-led, knowledge-intensive sectors remain resilient or show growth. So this update talks about 66,000 jobs. Are we assuming that all of that is coming from the investment-led, knowledge-intense sectors, or do we think we can retain some measure of balance across the whole economy? Thirdly, the water issue. I think my Green colleague, Councillor Bennett, has been in touch with Stephen about this today, but I would be very interested if you're willing to give me some first responses on what you think the potential impact of adopting a water neutrality policy in the next local plan would be, because I gather that is something that other councils are looking at. And finally, the language around infrastructure, I'd be really interested to know how wide a definition of infrastructure you're including in your thinking at this point. Is that both what we might think of as the harder infrastructure of transport and so on, or much more soft social infrastructure.
Thank you, Councillor Davis. So if the officers could divide that up between yourselves, please. Thank you.
I'll start, Chair, if that's okay, and others may wish to elaborate. As to whether growth is infinite, it may feel like it's very strong growth and it feels like it's going on. And I think that it is true that we are in a very strong growth part of our local economy here. What our consultants have identified is that tend to get to a point where they start to mature and that rate of growth starts to reduce. So we're on quite a high peak at the moment. So what our consultants thought in the last study was that the maturing might happen earlier than they now think, given the strong growth that has happened in the last few years. But our consultants have looked at what's happened around the world in similar strong economies where they have then started to mature and that rate of slowdown. So it is informed by not just experience in this country, but also looking at similar life science and other sectors around the world. And I think there is a broad consensus that there will be a point of gradual slowdown. Whether there's consensus on when that will take place, I think is perhaps an interesting question that we'll find out as we move forwards and and consult on our draft plan and the evidence supporting it. In terms of where a kind of middle case might lie, what our consultants did look at is this is their central scenario. They also looked at what higher growth might look like, where that maturing happened later, where growth continued more as strongly for longer. They think that is less likely. They think the most likely scenario is the central scenario that has informed the material that we put before you in the report. And yes, there was some fall in population-related sectors through COVID, but now expected to gradually pick up again. But that strong growth in the knowledge-intensive sector has still meant that there's been strong growth even through the pandemic. And I'm not sure that we all thought that's how it would pan out when we had the conversation around the time of the first proposals, when we were still right in the thick of the pandemic. But that's what the evidence is showing. And the evidence is now supported by several more years' hard data. So it's less forecasting and it's more informed by what's actually happening. Can we achieve some balance across the economy? I think it's fair to say whilst the knowledge-intensive sectors are seeing still strong growth, what our latest evidence says is that there is a need for other types of employment too. So it particularly picks up on industrial and warehousing uses and identifies the need to meet some of those needs too. So we will very much be looking at the whole range of employment types that are needed in this area to support not just the life sciences and the clusters, but also what's needed to support our population, our increasing population, and that range of types of employment. And infrastructure, I would say it's the whole range of infrastructure. So clearly we have to look at the hard infrastructure, water, transport, electricity, the whole range of obvious sort of hard infrastructure facilities, but it's much more than that. And it's not even just about community facilities and sports facilities and all those kind of things. It's about community well-being. It's about those whole range of issues. going back to those 4 themes that we had in the branches of the tree there. And we're very much looking to consider and include policies that cover the whole range of those key considerations that are necessary to support healthy and sustainable communities into the future.
Is anybody going to speak on the impact of water neutrality policy?
What Jonathan might want to comment, we certainly, I've had a quick look at Councillor Bennett's email to me at 5, just whilst we've been in the meeting. Effectively, she's asking a question about water neutrality. We have been in contact with Sussex, the Sussex Council's referred to. It's fair to say in a situation with our economy and the rate of change and growth, there are significant challenges in achieving water neutrality straight out of the blocks, not least the concept is that for every new house that you build, you effectively save that quantum of water from the existing houses that are there to equate to it. Now, with our annualised housing delivery target and then factoring on top of that the commercial growth rates, that would require, and the makeup of the housing stock, I think in Horsham their intention is the council can do some of it through retrofit of its housing stock, but the rate and pace of that has not even yet been proven in the public sector. So I think as we head forward in the conversations with the Environment Agency and the water industry about how can we effectively flatten the trajectory for demand through not only the measures that Jonathan's talked about, but trying to explore ways of conserving or reducing water consumption amongst existing consumers through things like smart meters. Whether we'll achieve water neutrality or whether it's conceivable to achieve water neutrality, I think is probably going to be one of those questions that amounts to a very substantial challenge. We haven't, I think we haven't yet concluded the conversations with the industry and the EA about what package of solutions might be possible in the shorter term, but certainly we expect heading in the direction of certainly substantial reductions in commercial consumption of water or water recycling and grey water usage to be a much more significant part of the discussion and the development format going forwards. And ideally, obviously, we're talking about the current the evolution of the next iteration of the local plan. We think that those measures may well be needed sooner rather than later, alongside supplementing the supply opportunities that exist in the big pieces of infrastructure to give us that headroom without further denuding the environments and quality of water in the chalk stream.
So there was a question about the soft infrastructure. You covered that? Right. So I just wanted to say something about the balance, the employment balance. What's kind of happening in the commercial property market is that there is displacement of the light industrial, the small industrial units, on which many service industries rely, and they're conveniently located in the city, so consumers rely on them as well as contractors, and that is an issue for the employment land planning that will need to be addressed in the local plan. So it's part and parcel of the keeping the wheels turning literally in the city. Is an issue that has to be addressed. Councillor Scott, you've got questions, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just 3 matters. The first paragraph under confirming our development strategy, that's paragraph 7.1 on page 309. That's the first matter. The second one relates to the equality impact assessment. which appears on pages 795 to 797. And then the third matter is actually a technical issue relating to the extremely comprehensive nature of the report, and just a question on accessibility. But I want to come to paragraph 7.1, as I said, appearing on page 309. It's about water, which of course goes to jobs and housing. And as was said by the officer, it's very clear that within Cambridge and Cambridgeshire generally, but particularly Cambridge, there is concern about the chalk streams. There's extreme concern about the CAM. And of course, there's extreme concern about water generally. So I come to paragraph 7.1, and in reading it, I thought that it indicated a great deal of uncertainty and tentativeness, and I would like to read it out, because I'd like the officer to clarify precisely what it's saying. Notwithstanding the challenges relating to water and housing delivery explored above, given the conclusion that whatever the outcome on those issues, there will be capacity for some additional development beyond current commitments in the 2018 local plan, particularly later in the plan period once the reservoir is operating, it is appropriate to consider whether there are some parts of the development strategy that it is reasonable to confirm a position upon at this point in time, having regard to the updated evidence base and the conclusions drawn from the 2021 public consultation on the first proposals. So that's my first matter, just precisely what that paragraph is saying would be appreciated. Now, two, coming to the equality impact assessment on pages 795 to 797, I did just want to ask if the officer could briefly indicate to us what the process is in writing up and researching the equality impact assessment, because I'm wondering who's consulted and how the consultation takes place, etc. And I wanted to go to the final, a couple of paragraphs here. The one where it refers to planning for additional development to respond to development needs, etc., relating to different protected characteristics and different types of homes that are needed in a greater range of jobs. And then coming down to the very next paragraph where it says allocating development at the most sustainable strategic scale locations, thereby locating jobs, homes and day-to-day facilities and services in close proximity should reduce the need for travel for all, enabling journeys that need to be made shorter and achievable by non-car modes, which are most inclusive for all and can improve air quality, etc. Now, that's a really important paragraph, and I agree that that's a really good aim. At the same time, and because I do want to say that what was really interesting during the pandemic period is that the corner shop, the local corner shop, was actually revived in a really massive way. And it was, if I can refer to my local corner shop, I walked in one day and they had a huge refrigerator all down one wall, which clearly had come from, there must have been incentives given to local business and so forth. And it was wonderful to see that advance, which fits in, of course, with what's said in this equality impact assessment as to the need to have local services and facilities nearby. But I do have a caveat that I do hope will be taken into account in this equality assessment when the final one is done. And that is that this can also lead to isolation and it can generate local community involvement, but it can also be negative to local community involvement too, or to community involvement, which really does need a broader spread beyond just this, localised capacity. And I'm particularly concerned about criminal assault at home and other forms of domestic violence, because if this localism, narrow localism, becomes too extreme, then what it can mean is that people who are subject to that sort of conduct can find it very difficult to get beyond that narrow area that they're in. And I think we do need to take into account that intensive localism has many, many positive characteristics, but we can't ignore that can be negative consequences too. And I would like that taken into account, as I said, in the equality impact assessment. And then the third point is this. This is really a magnificent report. There's so much detail in it. There's so much work that's gone on. But I have to say that, you see, there are there's 5 appendices, A through to E. And when one looks to the appendices and where they begin and end, it's actually really very difficult. Now, this one is a very small appendix, and therefore, once one's found it, it's easy to locate what it's saying. But my suggestion is this, and it's just technical. Is it possible, when a report like this is produced, to have a running line at the bottom of each page that says this is Appendix A, and it continues to say that until it comes to the end of Appendix A, then it says Appendix B and runs through at the bottom of the page. You can do that by putting in a footer. And it's just a suggestion, because it's such an important report. It's so detailed, it's so comprehensive, it needs to be made accessible to everybody, and that might make it more accessible. It's just a suggestion. But as I say, I appreciate the report very much. Thank you.
Stephen, please, thank you.
Just on your first point, I'll pass over to Jonathan or Caroline. In terms of your question about confirmation of the development strategy, and you asked for kind of clarity on what are we trying to say there. I think at its simplest, and setting aside the numbers for a second, what we're highlighting is Cambridge's economy is due to grow. That will require more homes. As a kind of fundamental principles of the plan that we're seeking your confirmation on around sustainability and ensuring that people have access to facilities. No, we need more sites to accommodate that growth. The precise quantum we haven't yet fixed. But particularly North East Cambridge and Cambridge Airport, we're suggesting that in any growth scenario in the future, given the core principles of sustainability that we think both councils are very strongly committed to, those 2 sites would be important sites in delivering your strategy, whether it was for more or less homes than we're suggesting, or more or less population than we're suggesting. And so in that section that you quoted about affirming the principle, the strategy for those 2 sites, and because those 2 sites are intricately related to both infrastructure projects, but substantial proposals that are needed now to bring them forward. In fact, processes that are starting either through the planning process to relocate the airport use or the water treatment works. It's therefore, we're seeking your confirmation that, having regard to those principles of sustainability, proximity, the infrastructure efficiencies and so on in relationship with the city, that those sites are important components of that plan, because it then gives the confidence for both the promoters to progress with that work, but more importantly for us as a planning authority, when the time comes, to be able to demonstrate that they are deliverable. Because if we end up, as with Cambridge Airport in the past, not being able to demonstrate that they are sound and deliverable propositions, then we end up excluding those sites from a really important and sustainable development strategy. So that's what we're essentially asking for in terms of that affirmation. Members of the JDDC are consistently calling for greater clarity around the Addenbrooke site or the biomedical campus. The various land interests are working on a strategy within the biomedical campus, but also are seeking expansion of the biomedical campus. As the report says, we're not committing to the expansion into the Greenbelt, but we do think that's a really important and valuable exercise. And of course, confirmation of Cambridge South Railway Station means that the focus on that location again is confirmed as a strategically significant site in the city, and we think it's worthwhile continuing with that planning exercise and encouraging the continuation of that planning exercise in between now and when we present to you all of the sites and all of the spatial strategy later this year. Jonathan, have I missed anything?
About the localism element of it.
The EQA, quite correct. This is a partial update that draws on many of the findings from the more comprehensive EQA that accompanied the first proposals. And when we bring you a draft plan, we'll also bring along a more comprehensive EQA, which can consider all the policies as a package across Greater Cambridge. But feedback, like the issues you raised, is really helpful. When you asked about who we engage with, we very much try to engage with the qualities officers of both councils. Also, does form part of our consultations, and we get an awful lot of feedback about the pros and cons of our policies and so on. So there will be chances to comment on it as well. So I hope we do get good engagement, and we'll think about how we get engagement on the EQA as we prepare it later in the year. Your comments on the formatting and making the reports accessible, it's something where I think in a wider sense very conscious of. It's one of the reasons we're having a webinar, to make sure we can put something on the website to talk people through the reports. But in terms of formatting, we continue to try and improve our reports, and we'll make a note of your idea and see what we can do.
Councillor Scott, thank you, because I think what you were highlighting was the importance of placemaking and that in the local neighbourhood and the facilities. And we all know places in the city that have that kind of environment and how much they're appreciated by residents. So thank you for that. So I'm going to ask Councillor Bajan now to.
Chair. Probably a bit meandering, but hoping that it's going somewhere straightforward. I welcome the growth that Cambridge enjoys. I mean, it may be a bit of a capitalist enterprise, which may not exactly line up with my politics, but we do all gain from this. There is very little unemployment. And compared with some other places in this country, I suppose we must consider ourselves lucky. But the growth brings problems. It brings problems with the electorate, current electorate. It brings problems with bringing whole new swathes of people into this area, which we will welcome with open arms, because they will be adding to or providing the seed corn for our growth. So we're talking about a jobs-led situation. I'd like for us as a council to see this as a bit of a triangle where all three aspects rely on each other. So as we get more jobs, we need more homes. As we get more homes, we need more infrastructure. So water we've discussed, it's problematic. But because government are behind us, we will get the water. It will be found. Because government want Cambridge to succeed, as indeed we do. Hospitals. We've got a massive hospital, but health needs to be taken care of. We need more in the sense of infrastructure. We need more health. We need more schools. We need more shops to feed that infrastructure. We also need a pretty good transport system. One of the problems with starting with jobs, which is where we are, is that house prices rise because there's not enough houses or homes to start with. So as a new company comes, as in AstraZeneca, house prices lifted in this area, not only in this area, but in the whole of Cambridgeshire. And that brings us back to Councillor Bick's key workers who get priced out of the market. Now, one of the good things is the allegedly affordable homes, which aren't really too affordable anyway. But I'm not standing up to criticise. I'm trying to look for the positive things. But because jobs are leading, we're not acting like a triangle where all three sides depend on each other. And I would like to see a clear articulation with all three sides of the triangle. So I want to try and think of some way in which we can treat homes like we're going to treat water. Water has to be provided for the homes. But is there a way that we can link employment and jobs and commercial sites to actually the homes that need to be built so that they're not running behind all the time? Because, of course, for developers, that's commercially very viable. When there's not enough houses, they build some and prices keep going up exponentially in this area. Or in a one-bedroom flat in a site opposite my house, timber works, woodworks, it's £450,000 a one-bedroom flat. Yeah, very nice. A bit compressed, a bit piled on top of each other, but a one-bedroom flat, £450,000. Part of this articulation, of course, so we've got the jobs and we've got the homes. And then we have the infrastructure. Part of that infrastructure is transport. And I want to spend just a minute on it. Without a proper transport system, everything doesn't collapse. It makes this area less pleasant. We have been given £500 million by the government through the GCP to build a proper traffic infrastructure. We are at this moment on a cusp where we will be deciding how we're going to provide that infrastructure, because this city is congested. Tonight I left home at 4:15 to get here at 4:30, because that's how long it takes to cycle from Romsey to Guildhall. But Mill Road was jammed solid. Cars were being particularly awkward in making sure that you couldn't get past them on your bike. So it took me 3/4 of an hour to get here, which I found very frustrating because I was out in the cold. It's -1 out there, and I was wrapped up well, but it's still pretty cold if you're not moving your legs. So I'm asking for some sort of articulation. Can we make sure, maybe one way of doing this, have this entrepreneurial idea. Can we ensure that if a consumer wants to build a science park or a lab, that they have to ensure that they can provide the homes for the people that will work in it? Not necessarily to fund them, but to be in alliance or cooperation with a developer. So if I need 500 workers, then I will bring with my planning application and for 500 homes, and that we link those two. So we ensure that we keep this thing in kilter, that we keep the balance, that on this seesaw, that homes are not running behind commercial development, but alongside. And of course, I would argue as I close and sit down that one of the important points here is transport, and that we as a city council, the county, as a county council, and South Cambs, as South Cambs Council, our colleague in this, have to ensure that they provide the right traffic infrastructure for this area. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bagent. I think at the heart of this is the objectively assessed housing needs. And it was quite evident that using the standard method, the housing requirement would be considerably lower than the one we've actually arrived at, or the options that we've arrived at. And that's simply because the structure of the economy means that jobs are growing very, very in this region. And therefore there is a strong evidence-based link between the growth in jobs and housing need. And the policy implication of that is that there would be an obligation on the development of commercial properties to contribute towards meeting those housing needs. And that is a policy issue that I think we need to explore.
Your break monitor, might I point out, just been going 2 hours, so it might be nice to have a little break. Not that I don't want responses to Councillor Bagent's questions, and I've got some to ask, but would it be appropriate to have a short break, Chair?
Councillor, how long do you think you're going to require of the committee? Because I think we're drawing to the end. And
I don't need too much longer, but knowing the committee, I'm suspecting other people might have questions as well.
just adjourn for 7.5 minutes, then. Thank you. I did appoint you as the monitor, so I Okay, we're live now. So, Councillor Pora, you are going to ask questions.
Councillor Bajent need any responses first, sorry.
He's had them.
I would just like to hear that the officers heard what I was saying.
Chair, yes, absolutely. I mean, we understand the issue, and obviously, the Shared Planning Service has actually piloted some of that already in places like the Wellcome Genome Campus, where you'll be aware accommodation is linked to the commercial growth, but it does require an element of scale. We're also having the conversation as part of the master planning work for the biomedical campus about new key worker housing provision, to help address some of their particular concerns as part of a kind of master plan that aims to consume more of its impacts than just the physical building or the jobs. It is quite difficult to link it when you get to smaller scale sites. But one of the things that we are talking to our housing colleagues around is how we can start to try and tailor the housing strategy to much more keenly understand in those particular sectors where we're experiencing growth, what that means for housing need in those sectors, not just the global super elite scientists, but actually the workers in that make a huge amount of these leading scientists' work possible, and try and understand the demographic, but also the housing requirements that come out from that, so that we can use that understanding to help shape the housing products and forms that exist on sites close to, within walking distance or cycling distance or connected to those places. So I don't think we're yet in a position where we can effectively impose some form of tariff or limitation on them. But what we're trying to do is to get more sophisticated in, that's what all this forecasting work is around, is trying to understand far more clearly, not just a number of new jobs, but the type of jobs, the sectors, and then using our housing colleagues and the planning application process to tailor the housing response to that need relative to sites as much as we can, because it's a really important point about the two things needing to exist in kind of symbiotic relationship with one another.
5 seconds, if I may indulge. I was looking for less of a symbiotic relationship and more of one that actually went in parallel, that it became beholden on the developer to ensure that the housing was there or going to be there for the people that were going to be employed.
And just to respond, unfortunately, the government have made that our responsibility by requiring us to plan for our objectively assessed need and to plan for the right number of homes. But I understand what you're seeing, whether it's possible to deliver. It isn't feasible to do that within the current setup of the planning regime unless you have the scale of, say, a biomedical campus or a very large housing release where you're mixing employment and residential uses. So unfortunately, we're left in the meantime to try and wrestle with that, but I don't disagree with what you're trying to achieve.
Councillor Bajent, are you satisfied for the moment?
I'll be back.
I'll be back too on this issue. Thank you. Councillor Pora, you've been so patient, thank you.
Oh, thank you for the break. So I suppose what I want to say is, I welcome this. This is evidence-based. The officers would be putting this in front of us, whatever our political colours, despite some local press which seems to suggest it was a Labour and Lib Dem request. This is just what the evidence is showing us, and I think it's right we consider it. I mean, it is frustrating, as will come up in the later agenda item, that we don't have the Cambridge Water Report, because obviously that is going to be so critical to quite a lot of this. But as we don't, I think what's here is fair. For me, it's a false argument to say it's between no growth or growth. The choice here is how we manage the housing requirement, because we know these jobs are coming and we know that people will need to live somewhere, as Councillor Bajent said. And the clear message from the first proposals is that the people responded to say they wanted sustainability first. So I think this plan is fair. It accepts the issues and it makes clear that the water issues are deal breakers. And the idea of the stepped plan, conditional water is a red line really, and I agree with that. I mean, if we don't provide houses near the jobs, we have more traffic, we have longer commutes. We just dump the problems on other areas, and we dump potentially the water problem on other areas who might have a little bit more than us, but certainly nobody's overflowing in it around here. I think we're right to be very cautious about this idea of diverse dispersal. I notice Anthony Brown MP seems to quite like to challenge a number of houses, but I'm not sure he'd be so keen on the idea of diverse dispersal, which I think would basically mean building a lot of the overspill in South Cambs, and that's not what I support either. It's not sustainable. We need to have sustainable sites with green means of accessing the city and the jobs that we need. And Cambridge is thriving, but we need the housing for our workers, for our children, for our families, and we don't want a two-tier system where only the rich can afford it, as I think several of us have already alluded to. I do have 3 questions. First one, I notice, I think page 325, officers talk about if the market can't handle the sort of the late development in this plan, we might need intervention. I wasn't quite clear what intervention is. I doubt it's going to be government giving us millions of pounds for council houses, so I'm just not quite clear what that means, though I take the point that I don't think you're suggesting that necessarily. Secondly, paragraph 3.12, it talks about Cambridge Water being able to delay the licence cap. I'm raising it here because it wasn't quite so explicit in the later paper. I mean, for me, I don't think any of us would support Cambridge Water meeting the supply by not reducing the supply that we need to reduce in order for the chalk streams to thrive. If I've understood that correctly, I'm guessing that's a fairly cross-party view. So I'd just like to say, yeah, the licensing cap being delayed is not a solution for me. And finally, obviously, as I think our group has argued consistently, we need to be clear that all these quite high density developments that are very sustainable need to have decent open space access, decent formal sports, decent swimming pools, as came up in the public question. And obviously we've consistently argued for that in the North East Cambridge site. And these obviously need to be included in anywhere where we build sustainably around the city. Thank you very much.
Got the market delivery question and the definition of what an intervention might amount to.
I'll respond to that unless, Caroline, you were going to? Yep, I'll ask Caroline then to do that. Oh, she's happy for me. Right, what does intervention look like? Well, what we're trying to highlight is that the track record of the house building sector is fairly set in terms of delivery rates, and despite all manner of promises, as I understand it, in the last local plan inquiry, last local plan examination about accelerated delivery rates, we haven't necessarily seen that happen in all of the sites where it was promised. Now, we do believe that there's a case for a conversation, a wider conversation around what can we do to accelerate delivery rates, but particularly recognising the limits of market housing in that space. Because what are termed absorption rates, so the rate at which people will buy houses locally, in fact, was explored in some depth by Sir Oliver Letwin a few years ago, has highlighted that it's not always in the interest of the development sector to build as many homes as they want, as we might need. But there are also limitations on the number of people able to get a mortgage to buy a house or who want to buy a house. So we haven't yet defined what that intervention might look like. Clearly, Greater Cambridge has received public funding to increase the supply of council homes, which is one element of that housing need that we're identifying that comes out from the economic growth. But what we're anticipating is the need to explore with bodies like Homes England and others, what can be done to improve the rate, diversity and portfolio of new homes that come forward at the same time rather than one preceding the others or vice versa, to meet what I think everyone would wish to be an inclusive community in the future, not just a community who can afford to buy very expensive homes in of the kind of costs that are unaffordable that Councillor Bajan highlighted for the vast majority of Cambridge residents. So it's a conversation I think we need to take to government, and we need to explore with its agencies like Homes England to see what can be achieved. But what we're highlighting is that we don't want to depart from the development strategy, which we believe is the sound and in the long term, the right development strategy for the area, merely to admit defeat on the ability of the market to deliver the number of homes that might be required when we can address the environmental concerns that it gives rise to at the moment.
Does anybody want to comment on the delay in the licence cap, Cambridge Water's licence cap?
Do you want to comment on that?
So this is really edging into the subject of the next report.
Happy to take it later. I just hadn't seen it quite so explicit in the next one, so if you're happy then.
And I think we all understand the point you made about high density. Can I just turn then to pages 302, 303 on your agenda paper? This is a long set of recommendations, and I'm not proposing to read it out unless you want me to. No appetite for that, thank you. I won't take that personally. So, do you want to consider it as a whole? Okay, so let's proceed. All those in favour, please raise your hand. That's unanimous. Thank you. Is the Executive Council minded to agree with the recommendation?
Yes, I do agree, and with the recommendations, and thank you very much. And again, I concur with the comments made that this is a very impressive report, very substantial, and I also think that what is emerging in planning policies is quite remarkable, and I think it's a big achievement where we've got to where we are, and I'm looking forward to seeing the final documents for consultation in November. But thank you all for your input as well from the Scrutiny Committee members, and your interest and your knowledge in this area is extensive. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Thornborough. We now turn to agenda item 7. The correct title for this is Consultation Response to the Draft Regional Water Resources Plan for Eastern England. It's on page 819 of your agenda paper. I understand that Nancy Kimberley, Principal Planning Policy Officer, will present this item. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this item is about a proposed joint response with South Cambridgeshire District Council to Water Resources East consultation on their draft regional plan. And as Caroline's already said, this is the first regional water plan and covers a period to 2050. This response highlights the concern of the councils about the significant water issues facing the region, and it's supportive of the demand side measures and the supply side measures that will directly affect Greater Cambridge, which are a time-limited transfer from Anglian Water and the development of the Fens Reservoir. The response asks that these measures are brought forward as soon as possible to protect and enhance the water environment, including the chalk streams through reductions in abstraction, and to meet the need for homes and jobs in Greater Cambridge. The response supports the long-term environmental ambition of the plan, which is the most ambitious enhanced level, which seeks to restore the status of watercourses. As it's a joint response with South Cambridgeshire, they've told us, members at South Cambs have told us that they're minded to include further information about the benefit of measures to reduce runoff from agricultural land through soil management techniques. And as the report's also going to their cabinet, we're minded to go to include these amendments through sort of post-committee amendments in consultation with the Executive Councillors, Chair and Spokes. Thank you.
So, taking questions, Lewis?
We've covered the issue of water rightly in other parts of the agenda, but this seems to me the sort of best place for us as a local authority working with South Cambs to specifically raise the issue of excess abstraction, because it's quite clear in the summer months that the health of our habitat is damaged by excess abstraction. So often when people are thinking about water, we're thinking about an extra reservoir or different routing of water so that we can be more resilient. But how can we lobby effectively to actually generate the extra water, particularly if that may be by reducing abstraction through what is sometimes looked on as a prairie of sort of wide landscape, have these denuded river valleys. So if we are the county arguably that's shortest of trees, and certainly given our in many ways damaged habitat going way back, we just really need, if we are going to take biodiversity seriously, and far more seriously than the current government, that we just have to be clear about, well, where does water help reduce that abstraction and make the Cam and its tributaries healthy?
Jonathan?
My question is, what more can we put across, and how can we help build this alliance, given that other areas may not understand the problems that we've got?
I think it links as well to Councillor Pora's point earlier. So a lot of the structure of this document is really seeking, well, how can the water industry reduce abstraction? And some of the graphs in the document are all about shorter term measures to protect the environment and longer term measures to enhance. This really is the opportunity to highlight. I think much of this, what they're doing is really addressing the impact of current development. They would almost argue it would be easy to deal with if we carried on as we were, just dealing with future growth. This is about how do we have a step change in where we get our water from with the longer term reservoir and so on. How do we deal with census with our partners on that? I think, well, I get the sense that across the region there is a growing awareness of this issue. The regional plan highlights this is not just a Cambridge specific problem, this is a East of England problem. And I would hope that fellow authorities are, equally going to pick up on this and support those measures. Certainly one thing I'm involved with, there is a project coming at the regional level working with the Environment Agency, looking at how they can improve the way integrated water management goes on across the region. So at an officer level, I very much stress that we would want to be part of that, understand its findings for how water planning can be done better in the future. I hope that answers your question, but it's perhaps something we need to continue to echo to our surrounding authorities.
No, I appreciate that and the thought that's in the responses. It just appears to me to be definitely one of those issues where if 20 councils were working together and more clearly allied, that we would have more impact. So I know that Councillor Thornborough and others have made major efforts to bring different partners together, but I just think we need to broaden that because, chunks of Essex, chunks of Suffolk, and all of the southern half of Cambridgeshire has got this issue, along with other impacts in other areas of different types, but given that it's about the geography of the chalkland and the geography of the drained areas, then we should definitely be looking politically to get a lot more councils together.
But Stephen Kelly's got a very comprehensive response to that, Councillor Herbert.
Well, just just briefly to comment, clearly we're depending upon what happens to the evolution of the ARC, what was the ARC, obviously one of the disappointments is that that project was at least looking at a pan-ARC kind of response to water strategy, precisely to pick up on Councillor Herbert's point about this needing much more than just a singular set of voices in a particular locality. And as Jonathan's highlighted, there is some work that we are trying to elevate and escalate. I think water is escalating across the whole of the east of England as a very significant growth point. I think the other thing that we're doing, which goes beyond the WRE plan, is we are trying to explore how some things we can do locally as well, including engaging with the lead local flood authority about actually surface water management. And I think the chief executive of the Water Resources East makes the point that actually part of the challenge that we face in this area is that most of the rain that we receive actually just gets shipped straight out to sea through the at peak times through the rivers, and we're not very good at promoting infiltration rates at greater levels and so forth. Now, the lead local flood authority are looking to review their surface water management SPD at the moment, and with Cambridge Water also highlighting opportunities to improve the conditions locally to perhaps facilitate better recharge or slower runoff rates that will improve infiltration. It is certainly an area that I think we will continue to try and explore because it goes to good management of agricultural land where we end up as a consequence of climate change having high intensity rainfalls that just washes soil into the roads and into the gullies and so forth. So there's some big moves afoot at a kind of sub-national level. The challenge there will be pace, I think, in terms of the rate at which everyone wants to move forward or is able to move forward. But I just want to reassure you that through 2023, we will most definitely be continuing to focus on water management and working with our local partners, the Environment Agency and the water companies to try and explore what ways we can see to both improve the conditions locally so that the effects or the potential effects of abstraction on the chalk stream environment particularly are reduced, but also to try and move towards that kind of restorative pattern that WRE their ambition is to get to, but which has clearly got a set of challenges in the path. But the team are as much as we possibly can, reaching out across regional partners, but also at the local level to try and achieve that objective.
So, Councillor Herbert, the ambition is to build a very strong coalition to address these issues. And I'm just reflecting on our development principles, and can you just check whether it says we enhance the environment too? Because I think that was a very important point that you made, that, you know, the first step is to stop the harm. The second step is to restore it to where it needs to be. And I think that needs to be central to our development principles for the local plan. Councillor Pora and then Councillor Scott. Well, not everybody's going to pile in. Councillor Pora.
Thank you very much, Chair. Obviously, I welcome this. It fits really nicely with the last item. There's a lot of synergy between them. Obviously, we want to aim for the enhanced, not the business as usual plus. And I think the other concern I have is obviously we need to manage demand. I mean, just for climate change, even if we had endless water supplies, we should be using less. And I think everyone, all of us as residents, need to do our bit. But we also need the water companies to do their bit with supply. And I suppose one of the concerns I have is we need to make sure there's a kind of hierarchy, that we don't get a situation where people go, oh, we're going to manage demand, so we don't need so much supply. That isn't what we're saying. You know, this is critical to our local plan coming forward. It's critical to, well, pretty much everything as we've just discussed. And I think things like the licence cap as well, I wouldn't want a situation where we had the water people saying we're going to do a licence cap and we're going to manage demand, but so supply could be delayed. For me, they are literally together. We can't put one first or behind it. I definitely agree, I think, Councillor Herbert, we need to bring other authorities on board. Picking up from the last item, maybe we need to go back to other authorities and say, you know, that duty to cooperate, we are not going to be able to build these houses without water. And then we're going to be asking you to, and as Caroline said, they didn't appear overly keen. So, you know, we have some leverage there, I think. And I'm sure Stephen and colleagues are using that, but I think we should be upfront as a committee and say, yeah, that's the kind of attitude we need to take. I can see Councillor Herbert nodding, that's good. I had a few picky bits, as you would expect. In the draft reply, where we've got the 8 questions, I would quite like us to strengthen it a bit. So strongly agree in question 1 and strongly support. I think question 1, we need to say it is not credible to take forward our local plan without water. And in question 2, we should strongly support and state we do not support Business Case Plus, we support Enhance. Because I'm a bit worried otherwise you can kind of pick through the data and go, oh, they said it was fine. The same with grey water and reuse. Quite a lot of it's new technology. We know that some of the sites coming forward, it hasn't worked quite as well as we hoped. And actually there haven't been many sites at all through our 2 planning committees, I'm pretty sure, with much reuse of water recently, which I'm surprised about. So again, I think we need to be clear that if we're relying on these technologies, it's not just desalination that's not proven yet. We need to be clear. And again, I've said about the local plans dependent on supply, question 5. And question 6, you know, we're aiming for 80, not 110. You know, so I think we should say that because, you know, that's what we're doing. And finally, I really welcome the fact that the government might be able to make some changes with building regs. And I think I'm right in saying that where we've had the building regs changes recently, Part O and Part L, I'm looking at Councillor Thornborough, they've actually come in not to do with your consent, but to do with when you build. So instead of some of these big sites, we may have consented them under 2 local plans ago, where we're a bit stuck because we can't enforce. These new building regs say, actually, if you haven't started on site within a certain number of months, you have to comply. And I would really wonder if we should strengthen that bit in question 8 to say, if Part G, which I think is the water bit, is amended, we want it to be immediate. Because otherwise we've got so many consents that have gone through outline without this, certainly I think prior to the last few years, that won't get caught by this otherwise. So I welcome the government strengthen it, but they need to strengthen it for anything that's built in the same way that they have for Part L and Part O. Thank you, Chair.
I think there were mostly statements rather than questions. I couldn't discern a question.
Other than to see if officers and obviously the Exec Council would be happy to strengthen those questions a little bit.
We'll pick that up, of course. Councillor Scott.
Thank you, Chair. I am just concerned that the report says that there are no direct equality and poverty implications. This is paragraph 4.3 on page 824. There actually, my concern is not that there's a typo error, but there is. It should be equality rather than quality. But my point here is that there are direct equality and poverty implications. Unfortunately, water costs money, and it shouldn't for consumers. And people are in a position where it may be very, very difficult for them to be actually paying water rates and so forth, paying for water. And I actually do have a question, and that is this. It comes from my Antipodean experience. In the South, in Australia, every household in the country has a tank in their back garden, in their backyard, in their property, at least one tank. And the tank catches this surface water that Officer King was referring to as just disappearing off into the water, into the rivers. If you have a tank in every single household in Cambridge City, for example, or in Cambridgeshire, where there was the possibility of having one in the back garden or in the backyard, then people would have their own source of water for which they did not have to pay. And it would be one way of actually addressing this problem of water shortages for housing. So I'm actually suggesting that that might be something that be considered, and whether it is possible to include in planning requirements or planning possibilities that tanks, local tanks, are built with every residence. But that's my proposition. But as I say, I'm concerned that there are direct equality, poverty implications of this issue.
It's quite interesting you raised that, Councillor Scott, because it would require government legislation, but there'd be no reason why the cost of water would be set at a certain tariff up to your allowable amount of water. And if you exceeded that, it would just become increasingly expensive. And so it makes the use of water an economic, it recognises the economic cost and environmental cost of water in a way which it isn't recognised at the moment. Councillor Smart.
Thanks, Chair. I've got a slightly different angle on that question that was just asked. So my question to you, Chair, is won't our residents be asked to pay for this problem? So when the Conservative government in 1989 privatised the water industry, ever since we've had less and less water, but more and more profits for shareholders and raw sewage pumped into our rivers. In Cambridge, we've not got enough water, less water as goes forward. Won't the water industry, privatised, simply use the market economy to charge more for water? I note in 1.2 use of universal metering, so that residents would just need to pay more for it. And in that case, they'll use less because they won't be able to afford to use the water. That's what the market economy is. That's the way it works. So won't that just happen? I'm asking if officers here heard anything about that. Surely that's the only natural course of action for a profitable company to want to make more profit by just charging more for something that is a limited resource.
So just to say, obviously, part of the water resource management plan process is to secure a strategy, but then the plans need to go through the water regulator, Ofwat, precisely because you're absolutely right that the water infrastructure, the £1 billion reservoir, is going to have to be paid for by consumers, because that is the business model of the privatised utilities. Maybe over a very long period of time, but that is how the operating model of the water companies is. And part of the role of the regulator of Ofwat is to determine what an appropriate increase in the increased water costs will be for resolving that problem. Picking up on Councillor Scott's comment, though, in terms of the equalities impact assessment, is this plan isn't the forum for considering that price consequence, because this is the kind of strategy piece. The issue in terms of the effect on equalities, unless we were to be able to quantify all of the price implications of it, is really for the regulator to comment upon. And I don't know how we would be able to consider it. You are right that in this council calling for more additional water infrastructure investment, we are calling for greater, notionally a greater cost for the delivery of water, or the collateral effect of that would be that the cost of providing water increases and therefore the potential cost to consumers increases. But as I said, there's a regulatory process determined by Ofwat about what the price of water can be to deal with these infrastructure issues, and then consequently how the development industry may well need to fund it through levies on developers as well as on consumers.
Well, Councillor Smart, I think you put your finger on it. We are where we are because of privatisation. The regulatory regime has sought to guarantee a rate of return to investors on capital. It's been very secure and risk-free, but at the same time, keep costs low for consumers. And the gap, the thing that hasn't been funded, of course, is the investment in infrastructure. which is why we see ourselves now with dry chalk streams and an adequate supply of water, because the industry's been starved of the investment it's needed to prevent spillages of sewage into the sea and so on and so forth. So it has consequences that we now have to face and address. So Scott, then I'll...
Just a final point. I mean, I take the point that was made about where this issue needs to be raised, but perhaps we need to have a motion for council, because the point's been made elsewhere that a lot of the water is used by companies such as Coca-Cola and Pepsi to make their commercial products. And in other countries, it's used for cotton and so on, particularly in countries where there's very little water. And I think that this issue needs to be, and unfortunately, it doesn't appear to be being addressed in this country. I accept that it's for another place, but that other place should be addressing it. Thank you.
Thank you. I think Councillor Davies next. Anybody else? Councillor Palmer then.
Thank you. I think my comment may fall into the same category as Councillor Scott's, but I'll make it anyway. We're having this discussion in the context of widespread public concern about the health of our chalk streams. And there's two dimensions to that. One is the availability of water, and the other is the discharge of sewage into our rivers and our seas. I know that leaks of sewage from Anglian water facilities were discussed at South Cambs District Council in the autumn. I'm just wondering if there is scope under the wording of question 8. Are there areas you feel water resources should be considering which are not currently reflected on our plan, to put some sentiment in there about also capturing this flip side? And if not there, where could we make such a statement?
Councillor Palmer.
Just wanted to come back. Oh, sorry. Just to say, to pick up on the licensing cap issue from the previous one, that isn't referred to anywhere in here. So it worries me slightly, because obviously it is a device available to the water company. So could we perhaps include reference to the fact we do not support delaying the licensing cap as what they might define as...
The chalk streams are not adequately protected, and they are recognised as a very unique feature, international feature. So our ecologist is looking to see whether it can get international recognition under the Ramsar Convention, and because they cover streams as well as places like Wicken Fen, and if that was possible, it would have to be an application. It would have to go to the biodiversity COP. The other thing I want to pick up on what you said, Councillor Porra, is the Water Resources East Board have instructed that they have said that they want the plan to be at the enhanced level, not as business as usual plus. But my understanding is that the current report is done to business as usual plus, because that's what they had been instructed to do. So the board was a late decision to say it has to be at enhanced level.
Okay. Are there any other questions before I ask Stephen Kelly to come in?
Well, I think I might ask John or Nancy for some input. But just in this point about the licence cap, I think part of the issue is we're waiting for Cambridge Water's Water Resource Management Plan. And it's not yet clear whether or not their water resource management plan, how it proposes to deal with this issue. There will be a consultation on that plan, which is probably the right level to respond to once we've got clarity on what their proposals are, because we've heard competing views around it, and until we've got the certainty of the plan, probably makes sense to comment in that arena. Jonathan and Nancy, I don't know, in terms of the other two questions around, I think certainly we can strengthen the sentiment in the feelings as outlined in response to the questions, so strongly support and so on. I don't see that as being a potentially difficult issue, and obviously the recommendation includes a suggestion of a delegation for officers to cover that point. I don't foresee from the discussion that took place at South Cambridgeshire District Council Scrutiny any disagreement between you on the strength of wanting to strengthen that. But Jonathan or Nancy, can you comment on respect to the questions around foul water discharges and so on, and appropriateness to the answers to these questions?
I think it's worth reminding members that, I forget which month it was last year, we responded to the drainage and wastewater management consultation. And that was a consultation by Angling Water regarding future planning for wastewater. And I believe we put in, fairly robust responses to that between the councils as well. But I don't see any harm in making the point that two processes are clearly linked in our response, and referring to the fact we made those responses last year.
Okay. So can we now move to the recommendation on page 820? I don't propose to read them out by popular demand. What I would actually say in respect of, well actually, I think we've got it here. You made some suggestions, you want to make some edits and amendments to this. So clause small 2 applies. So it allows you spokes to make your submissions to me and the exec councillor, and we'll reach an agreement on those amendments, if that's satisfactory. So on that basis, could we now, all those in favour, could you please now raise your hands? So is the Executive Council minded to agree with the recommendation?
Yes, thank you very much.
I should hope so. So, thank you very much for the presentation and your forbearance in answering questions at this late stage in the evening. Thank you very much to the officers for this. So, we now turn to item 8, or now page 837, briefing on major infrastructure projects covered by officer delegation. So the Joint Director of Planning and Economic Development, Stephen Kelly, will be introducing the item, and he's joined remotely by Philippa Kelly, Delivery Manager Strategic Sites. Hello, Philippa, for this item. Stephen, can you please begin?
Thank you very much. I'll pass very shortly to Philippa, who's got a very short presentation. But just to remind members, this follows out from the previous scrutiny committee, where you sought effectively an opportunity to share concerns or comments or update officers in the discharge of the kind of functions that, by necessity, in terms of the procedural requirements, we need to act on your behalf on. In relation to major infrastructure projects. We've separated that request into two components. Tonight's presentation relates to those two proposals that we're advised will come forward under the development consent order process, which to our knowledge are the Cambridge Water Treatment Works relocation and East West Rail. And then at the following scrutiny meeting, we expect to provide an updated programme for the GCP works, which are covered by the Transport and Works Act, and an opportunity for members to comment in or pass comments on those projects at that phase. So tonight, if I can hand over to Philippa, we propose to run through the two schemes that you can see listed at 1.3. which are the Cambridge Water Treatment Works, but I think starting with East West Rail, Philippa, and over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Just checking that you can all hear me. Simon, can you hear me okay in the chamber? Great. Okay, so I do have some visuals, but I thought it's just worthwhile just running through and summarising the report. So as Stephen has said, the report focuses on the two nationally significant infrastructure projects that will follow the development consent order process, the DCO process. So firstly, East West Rail. That project seeks to connect Oxford and Cambridge by rail, including through a new railway between Bedford and Cambridge with new stations proposed. Now, the project programme for that scheme is currently uncertain, although the autumn statement last year identified a recommitment by the government to the growth plans for railways. Now, officers are in some quite high-level conversations with the East West Rail team, and we understand that East West Rail will publish a report on the 2021 non-statutory consultation that they undertook and a timescale for announcing the preferred route alignment later this spring. With regard to the Cambridge Wastewater Treatment Works relocation, this is a project led by Anglo Water in respect of the construction of a new wastewater treatment plant on a new site within Greater Cambridge, and it will replace existing plants, including the Cowley Road site in Cambridge. Now, that DCO application is yet to be submitted, but it is anticipated later this month, early February time. Now, following submission, if accepted by the Planning Inspectorate, which is the determining authority, there will be a 3-month pre-examination period, and this is a time during which interested parties, including both the city and the districts, will be invited to provide their relevant representations. Now, a summary of the key issues for both the East West Rail project and the Wastewater Treatment Works relocation is provided in section 4 of the report. And as I've explained, it's an expectation that the technical issues that we're flagging up and we're identifying through ongoing dialogue with the various parties will be explored in further detail as part of the formal DCO process in due course. I do have some visuals, so I'm going to share my screen now and start a slideshow. Bear with me one moment. If you could just confirm that you can see that main slide, please, Chair. Can you see that? Sorry, I can't hear you, so if you could just confirm verbally. No? Can you see that now?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Okay. Bear with me a moment. So, I'm just looking for my notes. Bear with me here. Okay, so this is the project overview of the overall East West Rail project between Oxford and Cambridge. All these visuals for East West Rail are taken from a 2021 non-statutory consultation document. The 3 stages, project sections known as D, E and F, are relevant to Greater Cambridge, and specifically E and F, which are highlighted here as the new railway coming into the south of the city and new stations as well in the Camborne area. This is project section D here, and project section E, which is relating to new route alignment coming in to the south of the city on the King's Cross line, approaching on the West Anglia Main Line at Shepworth Junction. And here also project section F will relate to railway improvements and improvements to Cambridge Station as well. But as we say, we haven't had a confirmation at this stage of the timescale for progressing this, and we're hoping for publication later this spring by East West Rail to confirm their approach and preferred route alignment. This is the programme that you'll see in your report, but that was at 2021 and it's somewhat out of date now. We're waiting for further updates in respect of that. Moving now to the wastewater treatment plant relocation. This is the visuals are taken from Anglian Water documentation. This is a general location plan to show the polygon between Fenditton and Milton is the existing wastewater treatment site on Cowley Road, and then the selected site area, which is marked as a number 3, just north of the A14, is the proposed location for the relocation of the plant. The wider context, it's important to be aware of the provision of the North East Cambridge Area Action Plan, which is reliant for delivery of the aspirations of the plan on the relocation of the Cowley Road wastewater treatment plant. This just shows the sort of the wider kneecap area on this slide here. And there's an aerial view of the wastewater treatment plan. It forms part of the core site of the identified in the area action plan. This is viewed from the north, so it's looking across the A14 into the North East Cambridge area. You'll see the sewage treatment plan quite closely identified here, bordered by Cowley Road and Milton Road and the railway line. This is a wider plan just to show the pipeline working area and the proposed temporary and the permanent accesses. It's probably quite hard to see, but it just indicates the sort of the wider working area and confirms that the sewer transfer tunnel looking for construction complete mid-2025, assuming that the DCO process works to timetable, with the treatment plant fully operational in 2028. Development timeline is set out here, which is based on the sort of the formal DCO process, as we've referred to. I think it's worth noting again that there's a 3-month pre-examination period that would start once the DCO has been accepted, and that would be an opportunity here for us to formalise our response on behalf of the councils. And I understand that that process doesn't fall within the scope of the Delegation for Infrastructure report, so we'd be looked to report that that report back to members. We're in the process of confirming what approach will be taken in terms of member briefings and consultations and so forth, but we'll obviously provide an update in due course once we've had confirmation of the submission of the DCO. And that's just a summary here of the identified timeline, and also shows the previous sort of preliminary pre-application engagement that's taken place over the last year. And I think that's the end of my presentation, so I'll stop sharing now. Thank you very much.
Councillor Beck.
Thank you, Chair. I remember us discussing the need for a report like this, and I suppose the next question really is, having received it, in what way does that licence the officers to act on our behalf between our meetings? Because I imagine, looking at the list of considerations, for example, both under East West Rail and on the wastewater treatment works, that there are very significant substantive issues that may arise, and I can't really believe that the officers are going to make up something based on what we sort of debate in the next 5 or 10 minutes. So I'd be grateful for some clarity about what freedom we're implicitly giving to officers having received this, which really, should be welcome to get this information. It's we hear a lot about these things, but we don't actually get a concise statement like this. So that was the first thing I wanted to say. On East West Rail, the point that caught my eye was the key issue that may arise about the level of development expected by the East West Rail Company alongside the railway. So I assume that when we talk about that issue, we're not really talking about sort of development along the side of a railway so that people can watch trains go past. We're talking about development around places where people can get off and on trains. And so the logic says to me here that our focus would be around Camborne in South Cambridgeshire and about Cambridge itself, I guess, because although we've already got a station, there would be new trains arriving at it. So what actually, East West Rail Company, does that have some special planning magic about it that enables it to impose things on us? Or, I mean, just what are we to expect in relation to the local plan that we talked about earlier? Is there something here that would upset the lines that we're thinking along for the local plan? I guess we already somewhat have in mind Camborne as a sustainable location for further growth. Cambridge itself, we include plans in the embryonic local plan for urban extensions. So I'm just a little bit unsure whether we're looking at something separate and different here, or whether we're just looking about something that reaffirms what we've already got in our local plan.
Stephen Kelly, please.
Shall I comment first, and then Philippa, if you think I've missed something, please let me know. On the first point around the process, I haven't got that. Basically, I think what you're seeking, the assurance you're seeking, will be provided by the fact that although we have sought explicit delegations for elements of the process, the substantive response, in other words, the council's determined view of whether it is supportive and if it's not supportive, on which points of concern it's raising, will be formed by the committee. As Philippa highlights, we have 3 months following initial stages of the process to submit a local impact statement, which is the council's position in respect of its review, very much like you would comment on a planning application. The delegations, however, for example, in the first 28 days, we have to comment on the consultation documentation and so on, and their statement of consultation, and confirm a position on that. When it gets to the examination phases, very much with any planning appeal, officers are required effectively to present the council's position, and those positions can evolve quite rapidly depending upon the response of the consortium, whether it's East West Rail or indeed the Anglian Water, to those proposals, very much in the way that in a planning appeal, officers have a delegated responsibility to reflect and represent the best case possible that the planning committee may have determined, for example, in an application of that nature. So we see it operating in that kind of format. We thought it would help. It was helpful. There are slightly different stages to the development consent order process, which require us to engage directly with the planning inspectorate in a way that perhaps we presume in planning inquiries happens, but which is more overt and explicit. And the development consent order process sets very rigid timetables to these things. So it's not generally possible to be late. You'll be counted as a non-response and you can't then submit. So that's what we're trying to present here. Philippa will perhaps correct me if I'm wrong. So there are procedural components to this process that we've sought delegation from. But on the fundamental question of support or not support, the tenets of any concerns that might be expressed, very much with Cambridge South Station, we expressed a number of concerns about biodiversity, about loss of park space and so on. That was a negotiation actually fairly live, and we sought to obviously try and keep members informed around that. This, in some respects, the scale of these two proposals is greater. There are a very greater number of players. And so I suppose we're keen to try and make sure that you're as informed as you can be at the formal stage, but through the delegation, we're going to be expected to represent your views at the hearings or roundtable discussions that exist. Philip, I don't think I've missed anything on that. If not, then in respect of your second point around growth and growth along the railway, the East West Rail Company, they're not a special planning authority in any great sense. They're a company that have been set up to deliver the infrastructure. They have to follow this process, so they're like any other applicant in many respects. And they will seek a permission for constructing the railway and conditions of it, as well as the CPO, probably the CPO processes to secure it through the DCO process. But they're clearly an arm of government, and the discussions that East West Rail have to focus on to continue the government's commitment to investment relates to the quantum of growth that it unlocks as part of the infrastructure investment, particularly given the pressures facing government investment programmes for a project of in excess of £3 billion, which this represents. So in the various previous phases, they've sought, they've made no secret of the fact that the business case for East West Rail is contingent upon the amount of growth that it is seen to be supporting and unlocking. You're quite right, this isn't about spectator viewing or ribbon development along the railway line, it's about likely to centre upon the nodes. But I think one of the important things that we're trying to talk to East West Rail, and they're not yet fully ready to have that conversation because Treasury haven't set the ground rules out for them, is what does East West Rail either directly or indirectly contribute to in terms of growth in the Bedford to Cambridge corridor. But we would argue that the development plans proposition, which we've touched upon earlier, is an important part of a sustainable pattern of growth, because it's not just growth within a stone's throw of a railway station, it's the way that a railway like this networks the place with the public transport solution, with the GCP programs and so on, and trying to get East West Rail and their consultant team away from presuming that if you build skyscrapers on top of a railway station, that counts as the be-all and end-all of the economic business case. So I think that's, the conversation is likely to get richer over the next few years. In the early consultations, ludicrous figures of 100,000 houses between Bedford and Cambridge were mentioned in the technical appendix. I think we've moved on from that, but there is clearly a business case that needs to be made, predicated on an element of supporting growth, which we're obviously keen to make clear to East West Rail that sustainable growth pattern needs to resonate with both our environmental constraints that we've been talking about, but also with our spatial strategy and the principles that underpin it.
Councillor Bick, I mean, we rehearsed this on the 4th of October, and it was in the minutes we just agreed today, but I understand why you come back and seek that reassurance that the officers aren't going to run away with this. That we agreed a partnership that would give the officers the agility to deal with the administrative and the bureaucratic elements which will crop up at very short notice. But we will have firm oversight of the big questions, the big issues. Be assured, but please keep checking. Thank you. Councillor Davis.
Thank you. In relation to East West Rail, it's comforting to hear that officers are having relatively high-level conversations with that organisation. I'm not sure if I'm the only councillor in this room who participates in the local representative group for the area which East West Rail set up. I have to say that is a dismal channel for communication. It is possible to invest many hours and learn absolutely nothing. And if in the course of the high-level conversations, officers might be minded to feed that back to East West Rail and ask them and encourage them to make better use of that forum, I think it would be beneficial for everybody involved.
I share your pain. Any other questions? page 838 we need to go to. Just get there. So are we all in agreement on this? Can we vote, please? It's unanimous, thank you very much. Is the Executive Council minded?
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to agenda item 10, which is on page 845. This is the active travel strategy consultations. Oh, it's got it twice. Members are asked to note this item. If you've got any comment, please keep this brief as the decision has already been made. So anybody want to comment on this? In that case, I'll ask the committee to note this item. Thank you. That now concludes the Planning and Transport Scrutiny Committee meeting. Thank you to everyone who's taken part for all your contributions. The date of the next meeting is the 21st of March 2023. Can the producer now end the live stream? Thank you very much, everybody.